who are joining us today. We look forward to working with you when you officially take your seats on January 10th. Also around the room today, for those of you, for our council member elects, we also have members of our executive team here, as well as specific members of staff that are going to be giving you presentations in various areas of topics and interests. So a lot of hard work goes into this, and I want to send a big thank you to them for the work they've done preparing for today. Also want to thank Alina and the entire team of people that help with all the logistics and setting these retreats up, and the planning and the work that goes on behind it. It is a lot of work, so we always appreciate them and all the great job they do. So with the retreat, I'm going to keep my comments shorter. We're running a little bit behind. I will follow up with an email and send you some of the major priorities and initiatives that we have going on this year, as well as what we see coming for fiscal year 24. I'll touch on a few things, and we certainly have a lot to cover over the next 2 days. And it's a very information-intense presentation. Many of these, a lot of the issues are very nuanced and complex. You have printed copies of the presentations in front of you. Of our residents in Gilbert, Arizona. I also want to say, as we go through these next 2 days, I've always believed that success comes from having great relationships and strong relationships. So especially for our new council member elects and the staff that are here, and each of us, let's spend the next 2 days as we dive into these issues on building our relationships with one another, getting to know one another. I truly do believe it's key to success in life, personally and professionally. And we are all here to serve the residents of Gilbert. We're all on the same team. We serve in different capacities and different roles, but we're all here in service to the residents of Gilbert, Arizona, and to hopefully prepare for their future, to make their lives better, to make sure that they can enjoy the best possible quality of life that they can. Another factor that's going to be important to our success is that everybody participates in the conversations. We need to hear from each of you. Each of you also bring very unique backgrounds and experience and understandings of issues, as well as the people that you talk to in the community, the ones that elected you and the ones that reach out to you with questions or concerns. It's really, really important that everybody lets their voice be heard in these issues, so we as staff can understand where your concerns are or where questions may lie, and so that we can be more responsive to you and getting you the information you need to build understanding on some very, very complex projects and initiatives. Another thing I want to encourage, there's no bad questions. Questions serve the purpose of gathering information and building understanding and knowledge on things. And some of you have heard me say it before. We have over 220 lines of service that we deliver in this organization, by big and small. By major lines, it's about 80 lines of service. And they are as diverse and broad across the spectrum as you can possibly imagine. We are not a private company building 6 products, and we're all kind of focused on the success of those products. We treat wastewater, we fight fires, we respond to medical emergencies, we provide parks and recreational programming, we maintain IT systems and the security of those systems, and there's very little overlap in many of those functions. And so please do ask questions. And we also, as those of you who have been on council for a while and those of you who have just joined us will find out, we have literally thousands of statutes and codes and policies we have to follow. It is a lot. And so please, please, please ask questions. And we are more than happy to answer from the smallest to the biggest question. There's no bad questions. So please do participate. And if you don't understand it, please do ask us questions until you do. Let's remember to be respectful to one another. These are challenging issues and topics for our community. We're not immune to a lot of the things that are happening in the nation right now and across the world. We've got some tough decisions to make. And so let's remember to ask questions, but also show respect to one another so that we can make the best decision we can and to maintain and build very strong, solid relationships. And then last, we try to keep these retreats very relaxed and conversational. So let's embody that over the next 2 days. And let's not forget to have some fun too, because there is a lot of hard work to do. And I know for me, a laugh every once in a while keeps things in perspective, keeps me humble, and helps keep me focused, quite honestly, on the very serious work we have to do. So in general, you've heard this before, but we are a community of roughly 280,000 people now and growing. And realistically, we're in the last decade of build out. Mary mentioned on the tour of the town hall, we're 102 years old as an incorporated municipality in the state of Arizona. And we're in the final 10 years of building this community out because we are landlocked along all of our borders. So there's no more expansion for Gilbert to occur. There's some small pockets of county islands, but we're landlocked and we are in the last decade. And there's some things that are going to define this decade, as some of you are already aware and will continue to understand better. I call it we're in the age of infrastructure. We have a lot of needs across our water systems, our wastewater systems, our transportation systems, our park systems, our municipal facilities. We have a lot of infrastructure needs, and it's going to be pretty solid over the next decade as we complete build out of this community. We've also, many of you have heard, for our new council member elects, I look forward to talking to you in more depth about our City of the Future initiative. You know, in its most simplistic form, that is nothing more than making sure the decisions we make today provide the greatest opportunity for the next generation of Gilbert residents and our children and our friends to enjoy the same quality of life we enjoy in this community. American cities have not done a great job when they reach past build out in maintaining the quality of life that they've enjoyed during build out. And so that is where a lot of our focus is, on infrastructure, on public safety, on the quality of our neighborhoods. And I look forward to talking with each of you in more depth about that. There's some significant issues. We're going to cover many of them today, but we all are aware of the Colorado River drought conditions, and we're currently in a tier 2. We fully anticipate to be in a tier 3. Lauren Hickson is here with us this morning. She'll be the first person up to talk. But there's a lot of decisions we'll need to make to help guide this community through that. We have a robust, diverse water supply, but there will be things that this community will need to decide on how we want to approach this and how we want to manage our way through this. Because with tier 3 come water cuts. We don't know to the extent yet or how substantial they will be, but I think that we would be faulty in our thinking to think that tier 3 will not be announced next August and there will be cuts of some magnitude. We're also dealing with a lot of construction inflation and general inflation. Phoenix is, as you may have heard or read about, has one of the highest rates of inflation in the nation. In August, I haven't seen the latest figure. In August, it was around 13%, which was higher than any other region in the country. And so that is also creating issues for us with projects. With staffing, with cost of services, cost of operations, we're doing everything we can to mitigate that to the extent it's possible. We've come up with a lot of creative ideas, and there's also a lot of tough decisions to make to continue to manage our way through that. We continue to have a very tight labor market and staffing challenges. They were rather pronounced at various points over the last year. We had 40% vacancy in police dispatch at one point, which really starts to put a strain on those people that are there. And our ability, which is a very critical component to public safety and police service, those dispatchers are they are the lifeline from our residents who make that call to our officers who respond to any number of situations. But IT, private sector IT companies, information technology and technology in general continues to change our lives in ways that are truly staggering at the speed at which that's occurring, and those individuals are in high demand. I think at one point, Mary, if I could phone a friend, we were down 12 bodies in IT at one point. We're currently, how many vacancies do we currently have? Two. So a lot of that has been with your support, some things you did with us last spring to help with wage issues based on inflation, but we continue to struggle with staffing challenges. And you're going to hear from a couple of our senior staff members about our recruitment and retention conversations we've been having in the organization, trying to find ways to recruit the best people we can and hang on to the great people that we have. But tight labor market and staffing issues continue to be a challenge for us. And then within this region, housing availability and housing affordability is an issue. And we're hearing from a lot of our employers they can't find a workforce. And the workforce, one of the challenges outside of just a very tight labor market is where those workers are living and how far they are having to commute to get to places of employment. So, and again, that's not unique To us, it's not even unique to this region or state. It's happening around the nation, but because of the growth in this region, it's particularly pronounced again in the Phoenix area. And there's the pros and cons to everything. All of these great announcements with these major corporations that are locating in Phoenix and bringing those great jobs to Phoenix also brings a great demand for the workforce to fill those positions, and that workforce needs a place to live, and they need transportation systems to get them to and from where they're living to their place of employment. But as I remind our staff, these are good problems. We could have much more challenging things to deal with, and I'm not minimizing the challenges we have at all, but there are significantly more challenging things in other parts of the country, even other parts of this region, that these communities are trying to figure out that we don't have the pronounced problem in. So the problems, but they're good problems all in all. And I know by working together, we'll figure them out. So with that, I will ask Lauren Hickson to come up and we will start in on the presentations for today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. As Patrick said, I'm Lauren Hickson, and I'm the Water Resources Manager. And with me today is Rebecca Hamill. I'll let her introduce herself real quick.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Hamill. I'm the Water Manager for Gilbert.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm here today to talk about the wonderful Colorado River and the updates on what's going on there and the impacts that we foresee for Gilbert. So today's presentation, I'm going to give just an overview of Gilbert's water supply. Portfolio. Then I'll talk about updates on the Colorado River specifically, what we know to date on impacts and what we're doing to mitigate those strategies. And then Rebecca is going to share specifically on some infrastructure projects that we're pursuing in order to more fully insulate us from potential impacts. So what I have here shown on the screen is both Gilbert's long-range water portfolio, so all of our supplies fully available to us. But then on the right, I want to highlight that we have the breakdown of how we met demand in 2021. So they're slightly different because obviously we have a full portfolio, but how we use that it differs from the full portfolio. So in 2021, we met 34% of our supply from SRP directly at our North Water Treatment Plant, 38% CAP water, a combination of both the Santan plant and our North Water Treatment Plant, and then 28% was pumped from wells. So our overall portfolio of CAP water, which is delivered from the Colorado River, is made up of many contracts and agreements and priority levels. So right here shows the breakdown of the percentage, and this is also provided in your packet. There's some supplementary information for you guys as far as our water supply portfolio. And the most important thing when looking at this graphic on the right, it's provided by CAP, is the priority of those different priority pools. Different names for all the different types just based on different agreements in the past, but low priorities at the top, higher priority at the bottom. So cuts will come from top to bottom. So thankfully, most of our supplies are higher priority. How we use these supplies, as I mentioned, 38% was delivered either to the Santan plant or the North Water Treatment Plant in 2021. And the majority of that, 80%, is delivered to the Santan plant. However, we do have the flexibility to deliver some of that to our North Water Treatment Plant, which we did in 2021, about 15% of our supply. And then we have 5% that was sent to recharge, which gives us some flexibility with shortages when it comes to being able to meet demands directly. So then that takes me into the Colorado River and its current status. The two main reservoirs on that system are Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Those are the ones you're seeing in the news all the time right now with the elevations dropping. And the operations of these two reservoirs is very important. But there's two main guidelines that have been established in 2007. Those operational guidelines went into effect to help mitigate shortage impacts. In 2019, the Drought Contingency Plan was adopted, further to protect the elevations for forthcoming shortages that were foreseen at the time. Something to just really highlight when it comes to the Colorado River and its priority system within that water system is that amongst all the lower basin states, which is California, Arizona, and Nevada, Arizona has some lower priority status. And that specifically is only to our CAP supplies. But that is really important to highlight when it comes to the negotiations between the states, is that unfortunately the CAP is junior status. So you may be familiar with Reclamation's 24-month studies that they put out every month. And currently, the November 24-month study is forecasting for 2023 what's already been declared, the Tier 2A shortage that was declared in August and will take effect in January. And then in 2024, the projections, which I don't know if this, yep, it does work. Okay, great. So this is for 2023. We're looking at a Tier 2A. And then 2024, the projections show a Tier 3 as most probable and the min probable. You'll see this line up here, which is the max probable. However, I really highlight these lower ones because that's really where we've been operating the last couple years. And so although the projections have a large range of possibilities, it's really based on some hopeful conditions happening. One of which is that these projections are based on a 7 million acre feet release from Powell. That's an important volume because it helps stabilize Lake Mead, and I'll go into some more detail about that. But then it's also based on what I call hopeful hydrology. It's statistically correct. It's, there's some assumptions there that are a little too rosy, in my opinion. And so when we're looking to the future, we kind of have to look at those lower projections, and I'll go into some more detail here as to why. And it really does tie to Lake Powell and also the incoming flows that we've been seeing over the last couple years. So Lake Powell, on the graphic here, there's a very important elevation, 3525. The current elevation, I checked, I think a couple weeks ago when I was putting this together, is at 3528. So we're just a little bit above that 3525 foot elevation. And that's a buffer elevation that helps provide sufficient power production within the reservoir, but also I want to highlight a couple different pipelines within the dam and how the dam operates hydraulically itself. At 3490, we reach minimum power pool. That means that the flow can no longer go through the pipelines that create power, go through the turbines within the dam. But it also means we've gone below these pipelines that are larger that can pass more flow down to Lake Mead. So below that elevation, I've heard it said, those pipelines are like fire hoses, and the lower elevation ones, these bypass tubes, are like garden hoses. So the dam cannot pass as much water at the lower elevations, which then affects Lake Mead. And then also just to highlight, if you get to dead pool, no power, no water from the dam, which Lake Powell is upstream of the Grand Canyon. So these are just critical items to Arizona and to the country and to the world. So I mentioned the operations of Lake Powell, but then also how does this impact Lake Mead? If Lake Powell cannot deliver 7 million acre feet, then it will continue to drop. This graphic here is actually just based on 7 million acre feet coming from Powell, but also it's based on specific runoff conditions that are more realistic to what we've been seeing. So one of the major stressors that's occurring on the watershed is that we're seeing pretty average snowpack in the system, but we're seeing way below average runoff. And that's because the watershed is drier, the springs are hotter, so the water is not getting into the watershed, not coming down through the streams into the reservoirs. So therefore, we're on this downwards trend towards dead pool, which is why I call the other projections hopeful. We definitely hope for those conditions, and we hope they come to reality, but we need to plan for these conditions that we're actually seeing. I want to point out that if the releases from Powell are lower, then we're going to see that trend line in Lake Mead continue to decline faster. Just some more graphics. These are the current volumes within Lake Powell and Lake Mead. I mentioned on a previous slide, it showed that 7.5 million acre feet is what's allocated to the lower basin. And then upper basin is 7.5 million acre feet as well. So that's 15 million acre feet, but we don't even have that in storage in the system today. So Lake Powell's at about 5.4 is what's projected at the end of this year, and 7.3 in Lake Mead. So on that hopeful and really exciting note, just in summary, the Tier 2A shortage and the current, all the actions to date, 2007 guidelines, 2019 drought contingency plan, there's been some other actions, 500 plus plan, et cetera, and those just have not been enough to protect the system. And so you may be aware in June, Reclamation announced that an additional 2 to 4 million acre feet needs to be preserved in the reservoirs starting in 2023. And that was asked above and beyond DCP. DCP is 1.4 million acre feet. So you can see the system really needs additional conservation in order to buffer us from future declines in these reservoirs. And to date, we have not, that volume request has not come to fruition. They said in August that, Reclamation said in August that if by then the states haven't come up with a plan to save that much water in the reservoirs, that they would take unilateral action. They have not done that yet. They've been essentially just trying to incentivize conservation. You may have seen that the Inflation Reduction Act is being used to help fund lower basin contingency plans, conservation plans. And so that money is being put forth to water users throughout the basin to help pay for them to leave water in Lake Mead. So there's been a lot of different steps to taken by Reclamation. We have not yet seen mandatory reductions. Those may be forthcoming, highly likely, since we're unable to get the volumes we need voluntarily. Basin state negotiations aren't going great. California has the highest priority in the lower basin. They also have the largest allocation and they use all of it. And so we really need them to participate in order to help save the system. There may be some action there as well, and we're hoping that they follow through on some promises to contribute to the system. And additional efforts, Reclamation announced that they will be re-looking at the operations of the reservoirs for prior to the required date of 2026. So they're going to look, in order to reduce releases from Powell, they actually have to go through the NEPA process, an environmental impact statement process, because that impacts the ecosystem of the Grand Canyon. So they're doing that, and we should know more mid-next year as to whether there's approval for that. So lots to come. What we're certain of, we're not certain exactly of how this is going to impact us, but we are certain that we're going to have less Colorado River water, and therefore, we're advocating just for ongoing preparation, management, and investment in our water resources and our infrastructure. So with that, what does this mean for Gilbert? So what we know so far is that it's been time to enact our water supply reduction management plan. We've been in stage 1 since June. Stage 1 is water education. So we've been ramping up that education to the community, resources available, et cetera. You can see all 4 stages of our plan here shown. Stage 1 and 2 are all voluntary. Should we need to move into stage 3 and 4, that's when there would be restrictions on watering for our customers. Thus far in stage 1, we have, as I mentioned, we've done social media posts, outreach. We have a water shortage webpage that we continue to update. We have assembled our internal shortage management team to come up with different ideas and strategies to get the word out there and to help motivate our customers to reduce demand. We have met with the Chamber of Commerce to give an update in August, and we're doing an HOA roundtable next week to talk with our HOAs about reducing demand. How can we help them? What are they looking at with their landscapes as far as changes they may be considering? And then we launched our smart irrigation controllers rebate this in September. And since then, we've actually issued 56 controllers and one to an HOA. And our preliminary estimates from our pilot program is that each controller saves about 40,000 gallons, which is significant. So we're hopeful to continue to offer that program and expand it as we can to help mitigate the reductions that we foresee. Next year, early 2023, we're going to do an external stakeholder group launch with representatives throughout the town to help get their input in how to, just ramp up conservation efforts and then launch a non-residential turf conversion rebate. We're also hopeful to expand our rebates coming fiscal year 24. With that, I just want to highlight, this is from the drought contingency plan, what we estimated our impacts, the impacts would be from the DCP and what reductions we were forecasting. This somewhat gets thrown out when it comes to just what may happen with reclamation, just that uncertainty. So previously, as we were looking, we do know thus far for 2023, we're in a tier 2A. That's about a 1.4% reduction to our supply. So we're good with stage 1 of our plan. When we were looking previously at maybe a tier 2B in 2024, we still remained in that stage 1 condition. 2025, we were thinking maybe that's when we'd hit a tier 3. That would ramp us up to stage 2. But this is based on previous projections, and we're kind of not really in this environment anymore. So with that, we are looking at what are the potential realities. Again, these next 2 slides are just how we're kind of trying to bookend what reality we may be living in. So best case, maybe we need to implement stage 2 come mid-2023 once reclamation has come out with more additional cuts, et cetera. Maybe that's our best case come mid-2023. Worst case, just putting it out there that maybe we don't have any CAP supply. Again, we're just looking at bookending the situation because then we're ready for anything and everything in between those 2 scenarios. Arizona is advocating at the state level that the CAP cannot run dry. So this is a very highly unlikely scenario, but we must plan for all situations and every scenario in between. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca to talk about how we are planning to insulate ourselves from this worst case scenario.
Thank you, Lauren. So if you're following along in your book, you'll see a map. I'd ask you to flip forward to the next one. We're going to work on building this graph first, and then we'll get back to the map. So what I'd like to talk about is transitioning from the water resource. We're now talking about water production. So our physical ability to produce water at the facilities that we currently have. And walking you through this graph, we have, this is our current ability to produce water, our current production capacity. We have in blue our SRP surface water, which is produced at the North Water Treatment Plant. In pink, our CAP surface water at the Santan Vista plant. And in orange, our firm well capacity. So all of the wells that we have throughout the system in Gilbert. I have a few acronyms up here. I'm going to define them. So MGD, I'm talking about millions of gallons per day. So switching over from acre foot per year. In production, we talk about million gallons per day. So how much can we physically produce each day? And I'm talking about maximum day demand. So maximum day demand is the single highest day of the year, the hottest day of the year, the highest day of the year where our customers are using the most water. In 2020, we hit 78 million gallons per day. That's our highest to record. It's a particularly hot summer. So that's the number we're holding for our maximum day demand. And if you add all of these numbers together, the 45 million gallons per day at the North plant, 24 million gallons per day at the Santan plant, and 35 million gallons per day for Wells, you have 104 million gallons per day. So as Lauren was talking about those different shortage tiers, we have different trigger limits for stage 3 and stage 4, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But what we're looking at is this ratio. I'm going to call it a utilization ratio. So what's our maximum day demand versus our production capacity? And right now we're sitting at 75%. This is our current system configuration, and we're in a comfortable place. Moving forward to the unlikely but possible scenario of a short-term CAP shortage where we have no CAP supply. We take away that 24 million gallons per day from the Santan Vista plant, and our production, our ability to produce water goes down to 80 million gallons per day. So with a max day demand of 78 million gallons per day, firm production capacity of 80 million gallons per day, our ratio is 97.5. So we're in a tough spot. And the way we fix that is either by adding supply or reducing demand, which in Gilbert, we're looking to do both. We're asking our customers to conserve, and our drought plan is asking customers to conserve. And I'll also be proposing some additional supplies to help get that ratio back down. So in the next scenario, we're proposing 12 million gallons per day of additional well supplies to combat and weather the deepest of the CAP shortages. So with 12 MGD additional supplies, our max day demand stays the same. Our firm production capacity goes up to 92 million gallons per day, and our ratio is 85%. Now, overlaying that, oops. All right, we'll do one more before we overlay it. We expect that a long-term CAP shortage could look like half of our Colorado River allocation. So instead of the 24 million gallons per day we get at Santan now from the CAP, we're looking at 12 million gallons per day. And so this scenario brings us back to where we are now. Minus 24, plus 12, and then plus another 12. We're right back up at that 75% ratio in the long-term CAP shortage scenario. So now overlaying what a stage 3 and stage 4 drought might look like. Those are triggered at 92% for stage 3 and 99% for stage 4. So you can see here that in a short-term CAP shortage where we have no Colorado River allocation, we're well into stage 3 and we're approaching stage 4. With those additional well supplies in the short term, we're out of stage 3, we're out of stage 4. And then with the long-term CAP shortage, we're in a really similar position to today. But Gilbert is still growing. And so in this next slide, this last column is our resiliency supplies. You'll notice here the SRP surface water has stayed the same until here it increases by 15 million gallons per day. Later today, you're going to hear a presentation by Gene Jensen about the North Water Treatment Plant reconstruction, and that includes an additional 15 million gallons per day of capacity for growth. So that added into an additional 12 MGD of resiliency supplies, which are additional well supplies and other supplies that we need to keep pace with growth as we approach build out. We have a future maximum day demand projected at build out of 96 million gallons per day and a firm production capacity of 131 million gallons per day for a ratio of 73%. You'll remember we're currently at 75, so this is a good position for us to be in going into the future. Now, what that looks like in the future with future demands, future stage 3 and stage 4, with that 96 million gallon per day max day demand at build out, you can see that with the long-term CAP shortage, the additional 12 million gallons per day of well capacity is not enough alone to keep us out of stage 3. And so we really do need the additional supplies to keep pace with growth to keep us out of long-term stage 3 and stage 4 drought shortages. So to summarize, we're looking at in the short term, the deepest CAP cuts with zero allocation from the Colorado River. We could be looking at a 12 MGD short-term gap we're looking to fill by accelerating some projects, which I'll talk about next. In the long term, to keep pace with growth, another 12 million leading to 24 million gallons per day. And this is the number I kind of want you to keep in mind in the back of your head is a 3-year construction timeline. So when we're talking about building a well, it's a pretty lengthy process. So there's property acquisition, there's borehole siting, drilling. Do you have a productive borehole? Do you have a good quality borehole? It's an extensive process before we actually get into drilling, casing, and equipping the well. And that entire process, optimistically, is a 3-year construction timeline from when we start the project to when we're able to permit and introduce that water to the system. So there's a little bit of a lag in these projects. So that, okay, I'll talk first about the This is the slide that we skipped before back in your packets. This is our current water system and our supply limitation. So up here we have our North Water Treatment Plant. Down here we have our Santan Vista Water Treatment Plant. And the system is divided into 4 different pressure zones. So zone 1 is this kind of pink color here. Zone 2 is the blue. Zone 3 is the green. And the little corner over here in purple is zone 4. So the North Water Treatment Plant generally serves everything north of the 202. And Santan Vista generally serves everything south of the 202 with additional well supplies that augment the capacity in high demand times or when our plants are offline for annual maintenance. In Zone 1, we have a well inventory of 9 wells. Zone 2, we have 5 wells. Zone 3, we have 4 wells. And Zone 4, we only have 1 well, but it's a small zone. So when we're looking at accelerating these projects, we're going to be looking at augmenting our supply in Zones 2 and 3, where Santan is typically delivered and where we could use a little bit more well capacity. So this is the proposed acceleration of well projects. All of these projects were existing in our capital plan. They were planned for keeping pace with growth from now until build out. These projects have been accelerated. So we're looking to move forward a few of these that have current funding in FY23 and then proposing to move forward a few more of these into FY24. The reason they're staggered is we don't necessarily have the capacity or the ability to deliver them all starting this year. So it's a phased approach. And when we build a well, we design it with the hopes of a 2 million gallon day capacity. And like I mentioned, these wells typically take 3 years to complete. So those that were starting this year, we wouldn't see them until FY26. Those we're starting next year, we'd see in FY27. And with that, I'll hand it back to Lauren to close us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. So that just ties the well projects all tie into our overall Colorado River strategy. You've probably seen this slide on many of my presentations to council lately, and it will continue to be included in all of the council communications because really we look at our strategy under 3 main topic areas, which is operational resiliency, which are those well projects, ways that we can continue to deliver wet water to the system. We're also looking at other ways to partnerships, regional partnerships, in order to maybe do some exchanges, et cetera, to kind of buffer us in that interim before we can get those wells online. And then long-term portfolio sustainability, that's all about being able to continue to serve Gilbert for the long term in accordance with our assured water supply requirements and just for the longevity of this community. And then water conservation and efficiency, really looking at ways to reduce demand because that's going to also lengthen and extend our supplies as much as possible. So then what to kind of expect this next year and beyond. We're looking at a few different things. We've mentioned already today that stage 2 is likely on the horizon. We're accelerating requests for CIP. Those are going to have budget impacts, staffing impacts, and then also additional conservation tools to provide our community. And then there's going to be lots and lots of interest in this topic. And of course, we're available to help you understand what's going on and also provide that information to the community. So with that, I'm just going to leave it on this slide with just all of our efforts are really to make sure that shortage at the river does not mean a shortage at the tap. With that, I'll open it to questions and thank you for having us today.
Mike Scott, please.
You probably heard Lauren emphasize the importance of reclamation in this whole process. And so far they've been cowards. They've done nothing. And the only way that this is going to be addressed is if the 7 basin states work on it together. And right now the upper basins, they could care less. I read a quote the other day from a rancher in Wyoming that says, when it rains and snows in Wyoming, that's Wyoming's water, not anybody else's. That's the attitude of the upper basin. And we've got to get over that.
A council requested item to explore and discuss the possibility of creation of a Public Works Advisory Board and some of the merits to that, to having a body of that nature. And this conversation came out of, for those of you who have been with the town for a little while, we had a Transportation Advisory Task Force that the town council assembled, and when we were putting together the information for and reviewing information for the transportation ballot issue that was before the voters. A member of that task force, but we were talking about transportation and the many needs we have in transportation, as that body knows full well, as they helped us review that information and put that information and make that recommendation to council. But we were talking internally about going beyond just transportation related matters into more infrastructure related matters in general, and a lot of the infrastructure that's critical to the quality of life in our community. So the ask for this is a discussion on the merits of creating a Public Works Advisory Board and direction to staff on proceeding forward with that. Starting with the why. Why do we believe this would be important? Because infrastructure, utilities, and the environment are critical lines of service for the organization and absolutely essential to the quality of life we enjoy here in Gilbert. And those primary areas of focus as we look at this are transportation systems, water treatment, wastewater treatment, reclaimed water, stormwater, solid waste and recycling, hazardous waste, and then sustainability issues, which encompasses a pretty broad spectrum of areas of focus. But the thought being that each of these areas would be important areas that if we had a body to help us evaluate projects and evaluate programs, commission studies to help us best understand the needs of this community, there could be a lot of value in that, and value to the mayor and council as that body could help review and vet things for potential action and direction, further direction from the mayor and council. And so the how, what this would look like, and again, this is for purposes of a conversation. The Public Works Advisory Board is intended to be an advisory body that studies, assesses, and renders advice on a full range of infrastructure, transportation, right-of-way, solid waste, recycling, hazardous waste, water treatment, wastewater treatment, stormwater management, sustainability-related matters, and make recommendations to the mayor, council, town management, and the Public Works Department. And some of the things that I just stated, but some of the things that we see that could be a value proposition, we've talked a lot about community engagement, public engagement, and getting feedback from our residents and input from our residents. We thought this may be something that provides another opportunity for valuable input and engagement for our community as we evaluate projects that do have impacts, sometimes directly on their property, sometimes directly on their rates, and sometimes just in general with things that we do for this community that are of great importance and great value to the community, that this body, if we appointed it with individuals from our community with various areas of expertise professionally and by way of experience, could be something much in the manner in which our Planning and Zoning Commission is populated with individuals with various areas of expertise and professional experience, that they could help us evaluate some really critical projects and really critical initiatives in our community and provide value to the mayor and council with recommendations on potential action and direction on those items. So the how, and again, this is just, we looked at public works bodies from across the country. A lot of cities have them, advisory bodies. All the ones we found are advisory in nature. They do not make binding decisions on a community or on projects. They just advise staff, mayors, and councils. But similar to other bodies, we have 7 members appointed by the mayor and council with professional backgrounds and experience in the areas of focus, advisory, nature only, Gilbert residents, appointed for 2-year terms. These are all just things to throw out for your consideration. It's not that you could make whatever determination in regards to the size, number, term, just for purposes of the conversation. If we wanted to move forward with this, in looking at it, our thought was first, if you'd like us to work on this, in what manner would we go forward, but a scope of work in the focus area. So we threw some things out based on what other cities use these bodies and have them look at. We could certainly expand that. We could narrow that in more. We could form an official council subcommittee, or we could just form a working group, but really looking for direction from the council. on how you'd like us to move forward and further explore and vet this potential advisory body for the town. Then we'd bring that back to a spring 22 strategic retreat. So for those of you who have been with the town council for a while, this would be something in addition to the spring financial retreat we do every year, where we look at things that have a financial impact to our budget and to our community. The thought being, with so many new council members, 2 years ago, we had 4 new people come into roles. Now we've got 3 new people, council members, coming into their roles, that it might be a good time to do a combined retreat, strategic retreat between the executive team and the mayor and council, and really talk about the future of Gilbert, current strategic initiatives we have underway, new initiatives we may want to look at and undertake, but do a combined retreat so that we together can build a consensus around a focus and direction that we're going to head into. And we can use that as kind of that starting point to look back to why are we moving down certain paths, or why are we tackling certain programs. But it'd be a great opportunity to get us all on the same page and work together towards creation of that vision. And this is certainly something we could bring back to that retreat at that time to further discuss, vet, and maybe make a direction to move forward on it. If we were, we could look at potentially the May, June timeframe to interview and appoint board members, and then have this body actually start up in fiscal year 24, which is July 1st. We're on a fiscal year end budget here in Gilbert, or the entire state of Arizona. So fiscal year 24 would actually be July for fiscal year 24. What we generally do not have meetings in July, so technically the first meeting of the body could be in August of next year. So with that, I know it's pretty straightforward. Happy to have any thoughts, input, or discussion you've got at this time. And if you'd like us to proceed forward under which manner you'd like us to do that, to further vet this out and bring something back for a spring retreat for full consideration. So we had not envisioned that aspect of it, Scott, but it's certainly something that we could vet out further in regards to any infrastructure related piece. The thought here more was, and I'll use the Ocotillo Road Alignment Project as one, that this body could go work with staff to go through that project, establish, the need for the project, understand the variables involved with utilities and right-of-way needs, also provide an opportunity for residents to come and address the body on a specific project that has impacts to their property, and then make a recommendation to the council on what they believe is the right approach with that project going forward, or with an expansion of the water plant or a wastewater plant. That's really what was more envisioned for it, but we could certainly explore additional areas such as the one you mentioned. I'm not going to make eye contact with Jessica right now or Leah. We'd have to look at staffing. Yes, we certainly would need to look at staffing to make sure that we set this body up for success and get the full value out of it.
So I envision a combination of Parks and Rec Board and Planning Commission in this sense, because Parks and Rec Board, they evaluate Planning Commission, you use them as an example because we have specific scopes of work that some of those members of the community come from, such as architects, landscape architects, those kinds of things. So you'd be looking for specific members. Do we have an idea of what kind of jobs those folks would be coming from?
Public Works in general covers such a broad spectrum of things. I think that's something we'd want to talk through, what's the right number of members and what are specific backgrounds. We'd look for certainly someone with a civil engineering background would be a valuable member to that agency. Someone with specific utility experience, water, wastewater, would be a valuable. Someone with transportation planning experience would be a valuable member to have on a body like that. But I think once we define the scope of things that would go before this body, then it would give us a better idea of what types of individuals to recruit for that advisory board.
And you mentioned other cities have this board,
Yeah,
some of the cities around us.
City of Maricopa actually has one. Currently, the last city I worked in outside of St. Louis has one. There's quite a few cities that use them in this capacity. And as we know, infrastructure projects are very complex. Transportation projects, our transportation master plan, which the council just adopted, are very complex undertakings. And the thought being that at the transportation ballot issue that we did, a very big lift and a very complicated issue, and having that body assembled to really think through, question the projects, look at the scope of things, and then make recommendations to the council, we thought was a real value add in that process, and could be for things like this as well.
In addition to kind of the members that you just mentioned, Patrick, it might also be valuable to have a member our transportation system and utility. In the town of Gilbert, I think about depth of knowledge that's necessary to really vet through these projects and give us that extra perspective. Positions might also be better connected to national trends, regional trends and issues that might be affecting us that we don't necessarily have our extra layer of
I was just curious, with the community or maybe a neighborhood or something like that. Do you anticipate that being a piece of that as well?
So Councilmember Tilke had asked if this board, one of the things, again, just initial thoughts, Kathy, and I know we've got the council communications subcommittee looking at how we engage with our residents, our boards and commissions. That was a value proposition that we thought of, Kathy, that here is another opportunity for residents to engage their local government on something that has an impact with them, sometimes personally with their property, sometimes just with projects in general, to have their voice heard and have input in the evaluation of these systems. And again, so that body then can make an even more informed referral of direction to the council.
I envision just like any other public meeting, like a Parks and Recs board, that the public can come and speak, or planning commission where the public can come and speak and
Right.
have their say at the same time. So it is another level for them to be involved. I think the only thing that I would probably recommend is not 2-year terms, but 3-year terms, because I think the majority of our boards are 3-year terms, except for planning commission. So let's keep those consistent. And when you're starting up a board, it's easier to do 3-year terms because you can do a couple of them as 3-year terms and a couple of them as 2-year terms and a couple of them as a 1-year term, so that we can make sure that we have that staggered effect as the terms expire. So-
Sure. Yeah. Any of those things that again, that was just a starting point for conversations, but certainly we'd look at all of that and whatever direction the council wanted to go in.
Otherwise, so I think with anything else, anything?
But Mayor, I think it might be nice just so that we get into a habit as a group that when staff is asking for some direction, that we all say yes or no, or what concerns we have, because sometimes it's very easy if 2 or 3 of us are speaking and then staff is assuming that everybody's agreeing and maybe you're not. And so maybe we could just go around with the council and just find out if they feel that, is it worth staff's time to look into this a little further and bring back to us? Or if you had any concerns.
That includes council-elect members, is what
Yes.
Kathy's saying.
Yes, thank you.
So
I'm
yes.
counting you in as one of them.
seen on that board that are in construction, that type.
Of things the board that would come to the board, we'd want to try to cover all those bases or as many as possible with individuals with backgrounds in that area.
Extremely specialized though, correct?
There are some things that are underlying, civil engineers are very often involved in multiple aspects of the various things that I've mentioned. But some things like solid waste, recycling, sustainability issues certainly are more specialized without a lot of overlap. And that would probably be an important part of evaluating this. How big does that board need to be, and what would we want to make sure and find by way of backgrounds?
Are those those people, those resources available in call it a member at large?
Yeah, those are all the things we look at. My hope would be with 280,000 residents, we would have the majority of it covered and hopefully people that would want to serve in that capacity. But certainly, Jim, we'd want to think through all those kinds of
If
issues.
I could add.
Yeah.
If this is it's going to be a commission or a board.
So Jim, as they're evaluating projects, they could always bring people in to have specialists come in and discuss items for presentation purposes.
Right, there's only one young Kaprowski, so she might have to bring somebody else in.
At the liaison. Bobby, any thoughts?
I like the idea a lot. Yeah. Get some insight from other people too.
Yeah, the thought, Chuck, was that, things coming directly from staff to council, puts a very large burden on you to be that finder of fact and review the issues and deeply understand it. So we all know council agendas are usually pretty full with things. So having a body to actually do a lot of that heavy lifting and evaluation of things would provide, some community input as well as additional outside thought when it comes to making recommendations to council.
I would recommend a 7-member body. I think that 7's a nice number to work with. What do you think, Jan?
It might need to be broadened to 9 just because of how many different areas you're trying to cover. The one thing about the Transportation Task Force is that there were 9 from different areas, and because some people may not be as engaged, a 9-member body would at least get, 5 or 7 very active members, which would be helpful.
Okay, well, and Mayor, and I'm not trying to short circuit the conversation, but if the direction is to pursue this further, guidance for us is put together a working group internally, involve Councilman Kaprowski as the liaison to that working group, and let us work through all these issues and really nail down proposed scope, and then what we would recommend by number of members so that we make sure we've got good coverage.
And Young, you could also consider an alternate like we do with the planning commission. I don't think any other boards or commissions have that in Gilbert, but you could just consider it as you're
Sure.
looking at the scope. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'd be happy to, be the liaison and talk with you. But I think a working group is probably sufficient. We don't need to have a formal subcommittee.
No, I think a working group with staff and you as the liaison is good. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. And I like the scope of time that you included too.
Okay, so we will move forward. We'll work with Councilman Kaprowski, pull together a small working group, and we will target bringing something back for council consideration at the spring retreat, which is anticipated probably late April, early May timeframe.
That'll be difficult if we want to seat this board in May and June. So just keep
Yeah.
that in mind too. Because we'll have to advertise for it in
Mhm.
order to seat
Okay.
it.
Okay, we'll look through all of that and make sure we allow ourselves enough time to
Just
get it
large.
done.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm thinking.
Okay, Leah, Jessica, anything you would add in? Okay. Yeah, Judy?
Thank you, Patrick. We typically only have the applications open when we are actually recruiting for people. But one of the options is to have kind of a general interest application. So I'm just mentioning it because it's possible that we could maybe start looking for some of those potential candidates. And then we would obviously, once we officially have the opening, we could invite them to all apply. But maybe that would help to kind of start getting that interest going, possibly. So we can look into that. Thank you.
Our applications now include that. Would you like to be involved in something else or volunteer for something else too? So that's good.
Okay.
Thank you. Did you get enough direction?
Yep, I think we've got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully, you stay over there. Are you staying over there? All right, hopefully everybody is still on the sugar high, not on the sugar crash from the cookies. Some of us had way too many cookies to eat at lunch. So we will get started on the North Water Treatment Plant. And we wanted to start with this quote. So as you already know, and as many of you are learning, we have an exceptionally talented team here in Gilbert working to anticipate the community's current and long-term needs, especially when it comes to infrastructure. This team believes that infrastructure is the backbone of economic growth. And the reason that we believe this is because we know firsthand that infrastructure is how we provide our residents and our own families with clean water, with safe streets, with sewer, with an array of services in Gilbert. We know infrastructure helps create jobs and it supports business growth, as evidenced by this aspirational photo for downtown Gilbert. So this quote from Margaret Thatcher, she may have been intending to be literal to roads, but I interpret this quote as applying to all infrastructure, and that is economists travel on infrastructure. So today, the presentation that Jean is going to walk you through today is on one of Gilbert's most significant infrastructure projects in our history, which also happens to be one of the largest water infrastructure projects in the entire Southwest. And that is nine. So you heard a lot of acronyms yesterday. So Jean's going to walk through the details of this project, including some of the key and very significant challenges facing the project. There's a lot of information that she's going to share, and trust me when I say that there's an overwhelming abundance of information that was pared down and taken out of the presentation to keep this as digestible as possible. But if you take just a few things away from what she's going to walk through with you, if you take just a few things away from this presentation, it is that delivering safe, clean water is a sacred trust that we take very seriously, that maximizing Gilbert's water resiliency is imperative, and that time is of the essence with this critical project for our residents and our community. And so with that, Jean's going to walk you through the North Water Treatment Plant Reconstruct.
Thank you, Leah. So for those folks I haven't had the chance to meet before, my name is Jean Jensen. I'm one of the capital project supervisors in our utilities area. So my team delivers water, wastewater, stormwater, and reclaimed water infrastructure projects on behalf of the operations teams. Really glad to be with you here today. It's been a little while since I've had an opportunity to share this project with the council at large. The last large presentation we shared with you was in February of 2021. But since then, we've had a number of updates and updates along the way that are, I think, relevant here, but it's time for us to bring this project back. And on top of the conversations you've already had today with regards to water resources and others, I just wanted to bring us back to the original challenge statement that this project put forward. The internal subject matter experts, and we are blessed to have a team of folks that really understand every component of these types of projects, work together and develop the challenge statement you see before you. And I share it with you now because I will tell you that this challenge statement evolved through this project, but its underlying message is still true. A substantial investment is required in order for us to continue to produce safe, reliable, and resilient water from our North Water Treatment Facility. A brief overview of what we're going to touch on. Leah was very gracious to say that we cut out a lot of material. For context, there are more than 70 slides in the boneyard for this that we could spend time on, but in the interest of time, we are going to make sure we focus on the most important messages and takeaways. As you saw on that first slide, we had key takeaways. Each section will have some key takeaways, and for those slides that are very material dense, you may see a summary note at the very top to help you understand what's the most important message we're sharing. We'll walk through the initial challenge and how this project came to be through the staff internal development process, that business case that was presented, and how the project has since developed the project team, how we're implementing best value through our value engineering processes, our cost and program recommendation, as well as share with you an upcoming milestone. Actually, next week, we'll be going before the Planning Commission for the special use permit on this facility. So I want to make sure that you folks are completely up to date as to where we are with this project and how we're moving forward. So the initial challenge, this view here looks towards the east. So actually the drone that took this image is probably about 600 feet west or east of us here. The North Water Treatment Plant is actually located barely a stone's throw across the riparian from us. This view takes a look at the existing facility and wants to share with you just how large of a facility this is. This is a really involved space, a lot of structures. So just you have a sense of the capacity and the space that we're taking up. The takeaways for this initial challenge is that this facility serves about 150,000 of our residents today, but is anticipated to serve up to 250,000 in the future. This is a substantial amount of impact to our community. The staff efforts to date have focused on creating best value and considering long-range infrastructure implications, not just what's easy and quick today, but what's the best investment for the community going forward. Also, I want to reiterate just how much collaboration happened between the internal subject matter folks. You've got some of them here in the room today with Lauren and Rebecca, and Jessica, and others, but it went far beyond the stands of this room to include a group of folks who are not able to be in front of you today sharing with it, but I wanted you to know that they were involved as well. So for some context on the North Water Treatment Plant, it is an existing 45 million gallon per day facility located in the northeastern corner of Gilbert. Like I mentioned, just down the street, currently serves about 150,000 residents, anticipated to serve 250 at build out. It is the backbone and the most flexible part of our resilient water supply. It does not receive water directly from the Colorado River. It's a different water source, the Salt Verde rivers, as well as groundwater. And it's an economic driver. As you can see highlighted in blue, this is the sections of our community that receive water from this facility today. They open a tap, they're likely getting water that came from this facility. It's the economic driver behind our Northwest Redevelopment District, our downtown, our medical complex near the Gateway Hospital, as well as the regional economic components that are served through the Gateway Airport areas. Now, this slide summarizes some of the efforts taken on by staff, highlighting the key takeaways from those efforts, including that our integrated master plan indicated we needed to reduce our dependence on groundwater in order to be able to provide that resource in the time of drought or need. Our water quality master plan identified the most important components of our water quality compliance portfolio going forward, helping us focus our efforts where they would most be needed in the years going forward. A facility condition assessment was completed in 2018, the first that had been done for this facility, identifying a little north of $70 million in structural rehab and repair. These are structural improvements that wouldn't change a thing about the facility other than keep the walls up and the lights on. This is an important note because it's part of the decision process. In addition to that, staff took on a very comprehensive piloting effort to look at different ways of running the facility to look for optimization, as well as making improvements throughout the systems. So how did we get here? How do you get to the point where you realize this is the investment you need to make? And I'll share with you that it started, for me at least, as a part of an ozone project system replacement. We were asked to take a look at the ozone system on site and say, it's time to make a major rehab of this structure. It's a 16-year-old piece of equipment. It needed $1 million in maintenance. Is this the best thing to do? Do we want to sink $1 million into a piece of equipment that's approaching its end of life? Or do we need to ask ourselves questions? We did a cost-benefit analysis on that piece of equipment and identified that replacement was appropriate. If we're replacing it, we should optimize how we use it. And optimization for us is where the most opportunity may lay. So that optimization encouraged us to ask ourselves a lot of questions. Is that ozone system in the right place? Why do we use ozone? Is there another compound? At the same time that we were having these conversations within that one project, the operations teams were working together to take a look at how to handle our disinfection byproduct compliance. I know we talked yesterday about eliminating or reducing acronyms as much as we can, so I'll tell you right now, disinfection byproduct, DBP, total trihalomethane, and TTHM for us are all interchangeable terms. So you may see DBP or THM on these slides. That is a compliance challenge, so our operations teams were meeting with engineering and one another to figure out how to continue to maintain compliance. And we wanted to take advantage of a decadal dry up on the canal, an opportunity to go through every part of that facility and make sure it was in good working order and had the investments it needed to run long into the future. And the net effect of all of these efforts going on at once was this incredible cross-pollination conversation between all the teams where we went, hang on, I don't think my project is as far removed from your effort and as far removed from this other effort as we thought. So that got us to the point where we started to develop this large packet of information that we could share with our leadership in order to gain guidance. That business case development comes into 4 primary areas that were the backbone of why we recommended the reconstruction of the North Plant. First and foremost is the regulation. Gilbert's population has grown from when a regulation was first put in place, and we will walk through the timeline on that. That population grew and crossed a threshold, 250,000 residents, which required that we have to take a new look at our regulation and compliance standards in order to meet that going forward. Water quality, the North Plant was designed at a time period where water quality was really stable and predictable. But unfortunately, we have experienced some really dramatic changes in the watershed that serve this facility. And that component was a key factor because the North Plant was never designed to operate the way that we've asked it to design. The terrible analogy that I usually use is if you bought a car in the 1960s for a road trip, you wouldn't take that same car to F1. And that's what we asked that car to do. We bought that car with a certain kind of water quality in mind, and we tried to put it on a much different racetrack. From a water resources standpoint, when we first kicked this project off, we were focused on preserving our groundwater, but now we're starting to see the incredible importance of this facility to unlock our flexibility as we face continued drought conditions on the Colorado River. And finally, as I've mentioned a few times, site condition. So those are the 4 pieces of the puzzle that we put together to build this business case. So the stakeholder team, we've consistently tried to create a message that we can all understand and work towards, and that's where this initial challenge statement you saw on the first few slides came from. Those 4 pieces of the puzzle come together as such. So from a regulatory space, the North Water Treatment Plant, if you recall from that blue overlay, serves northern Gilbert. And the eyebrow that's represented on the 2018 map represents kind of the limit where it's no longer the majority facility. So residents north of that eyebrow typically would receive water from the North Plant in the majority. The reason I point that out is below that eyebrow, you see that there's less pockets of yellow, orange, and red, which indicate potential compliance challenges. That's because our Santan Vista Water Treatment Plant receives a different water portfolio and it's less reactive. So it tends to be a more stable water for our long-term regulations. This growth that we had here in Gilbert pushed us to be the first community in the country that we are aware of that went from one level of compliance to the next highest tier. So we grew, and that growth required we take our 8 existing sampling sites that were distributed based off of a model of our system at that time, pick 12 new sites based on a representation of our system, and those sites have to be married to being representative of the full system. You don't get to pick where they are. You have to do a pretty comprehensive analysis to say these sampling points are representative of potentially some challenges in our system. The reason we point all that out is because as you see on the left image, and then as we zoom in onto the right, if we were to reduce our reliance on groundwater, which is how we had been managing this particular compliance challenge to date, we would go from having pockets of yellow, orange, and red to almost our entire zone 1 being a challenge compliance area. I share this because it's the worst thing from the water operations standpoint to have to send out, or real close to it at least. This is a snapshot of a letter that went out to our residents, informing them that the water that they were receiving was not in compliance for at least 1 monitoring period. Now, disinfection byproducts are a long-term chronic contaminant. This is not something that makes you sick immediately, but over a long time, a lifetime of exposure, it does increase some risks, in this case, that we want to be sure to mitigate. I share this with you to help you understand where it falls on our timeline. It's right here in the Zone 1 TTHM violations. We had 2 consecutive quarters where those letters went out. But you ask sometimes, where do these projects come from? How far back do they go? And in this case, the regulation was first introduced in 2006, was first part of our compliance program in 2012. And at the same time that we're doing that, we have to take a look at the system. Those operational trigger exceedances are a process within this regulation where you look at how the system is running and you say to yourself, if I keep running this way, I might have an issue next quarter. I point this out because it's to share that the operations teams did a great job of seeing those kind of yellow lights and getting that system back where it needed to be. Unfortunately, in 2017, they weren't able to use all the tools in that toolbox. There were some equipment issues, other challenges that resulted in 2 known violations. Those were reported to the public. At the same time, we were starting our 2017 Water Resources Master Plan. We're in the process of updating that now. That's a requirement every 5 years. We did a water quality master plan, first one for the town of Gilbert, where we wanted to make sure we were investing well across the entire water system, not just focusing site by site, but saying in a comprehensive way, how are we doing water quality? We underwent that condition assessment and then the census. Although a little bit more complicated in 2020 than normal, it did come back and indicate that we had exceeded that population threshold and we needed to redistribute our sites. A key point from this slide, if you take nothing else away, is that we've been under this new regulation since the beginning of the year. And so far, so good. The team has kept us within compliance despite the increased challenges, and we're doing well. But this is requiring kind of an all hands on deck approach. I mentioned before in my terrible analogy about cars that the North Plant was designed at a period in time when water was much more reliable in terms of its quality. And the reason here, and I'll point it out into the graphic, is a function of many different things, but one in specific is the impact of wildfire and weather pattern changes on our watersheds. So Phoenix is the little tiny blip in the bottom left-hand corner of this map that is served by this massive watershed. Of that chunk, that watershed has unfortunately experienced consistent wildfires. The first and most significant of which that changed our portfolio was the Rodeo Chetasky fire back in 2000, which burned hundreds of thousands of acres in northeastern Arizona. For those of you that enjoy the Heber Overgard or Show Low areas, if you drive through there as much as I have, you've probably noticed that that area is still recovering. And that's part of why, although this fire is now 22 years old, it permanently and likely irrevocably changed the water quality on this watershed that we see at the facility. Beyond that, the plant sees 3 different water types throughout the year. It is one of the only facilities in the country that's asked to treat water from 2 different rivers and then throw some groundwater in there too. That salt river that we see in the summer is more likely to form these disinfection byproducts. The water we see in the fall, the Verde, has color to it, thus the name. It also has an increased fraction of arsenic. And well water, although we often use groundwater to offset our disinfection byproducts, this one actually has some components in it that can aggravate that disinfection byproduct process. The plant used to shift water in April and October, reliably, just one river swap to the other. And what's changed since then as the weather patterns have shifted is that we're seeing that this water quality shift, this river shift, is not biannual. It can be weekly. It can be every few days. If you remember a late winter snowstorm on the Verde watershed about 3 years ago now, probably 4 years ago now because the pandemic's a giant time suck for me, but there was a lot of snow kind of up by Payson. That snow was so substantial that the river swap didn't actually occur until 3/4 of the way through July. But Salt River Project needed to run that system differently in order to meet their own obligations. And so we were seeing water quality shift Thursday night from Verde to Salt, Monday night from Salt back to Verde, and groundwater in between. So a facility that used to change every 6 months was now changing 3 times a week. Groundwater isn't just an important resource in terms of putting physical water into physical pipes, but there is a financial implication to not using our full allotment of reallocated water. This totally sustainable water here, because of the way the facility was designed, we were leaving up to 7,000 acre-feet of renewable water in our proverbial bank account that we weren't using and drafting out instead groundwater to make those needs make up. So here, what we see is that we want to be able to maximize this renewable resource versus using our groundwater, which is our insurance policy against the future. I mentioned also our condition assessment. The most important piece of this was there was a $70 million backlog of structural and physical repairs the facility needed. But in our evaluation, we also identified that the facility was requiring double the industry standard for reinvestment, indicating that in addition to the 70 million we'd found, there was likely underlying problems within the facility in terms of how it was constructed and its quality that were going to continue to become a financial strain on the community. This structural re-enhancement, whatever you want to call it, would not have allowed us to do what we need to do treatment-wise. It would have simply improved the physical structures to make sure that they were stable for the future. So what does that mean? That was a lot of really dense information, and the subject matter team has a little bit of self-awareness. We are nerds, but we understand that not everyone wants to get into the weeds with us. So because there are some that might, the team put together a 30-ish, maybe 35-page white paper summarizing everything you just saw, and then also doing some alternatives evaluation and analysis. We knew that we needed to kind of condense all of these ideas and thoughts and analysis the teams had been doing and putting them together in a way that made us so we could all see it together. That then allowed us to take a look at all the alternatives. What do? We obviously have a challenge. How do we bring it forward? We developed alternatives evaluations that were then ultimately presented to the council in April of 2020. But between then, when these challenges first came to play and that presentation, it wasn't as though the North Plant wasn't being a continuous point of consideration. I share with you this slide because it basically just highlights the challenges that the facility was brought forward or the various communications to council between when those violations happened and 2020 when we presented the actual plant project for your consideration. Highlighted in red are probably the ones that were the most significant, including our water quality update on the violations, our water quality master plan and water resources master plan indicating that we had the challenges of groundwater use as well as drinking water compliance. The North Plant condition assessment was brought forward. There was a general presentation about long-range infrastructure planning and how we need to be looking long-term. We should be building infrastructure for the decadal view, not for the daily. We presented in April of 2020 at the financial retreat the various alternatives for your consideration. And then in November, we came back and said, we think we also want to recommend not just a reconstruction of the base 45 MGD plant, but going ahead and taking the facility to its intentional build out of 60 million gallons per day. The one thing I didn't highlight on that was that of those items you saw there, 25% of the projects conducted at North Plant by number, not by dollar, were emergencies in that same time period. So that's a substantial concern point for my team specifically, because that means there's something going on we're not predicting. So this graphic was presented in April of 2020 to share with the council the thought process that the staff went through in evaluating the alternatives for the North Plant rebuild. We focused on a series of alternatives, and I share a few of them, although there are sub-alternatives and some additionals that were out there, to share that we went as far as what happens if we do nothing? What is the implication of doing that? All the way through, what does a regional partnership look like? Can we reach out to our sister cities, in this case, our boundary sister cities, not our international ones, but to build these structures that would help us save dollars potentially? And the short version was there was not a regional solution available. So as we went through each alternative, we vetted it against one of the conditions above. Does it get our water quality where it needs to be? Does it protect and allow us to have flexible use of our groundwater? Does it maximize our public trust by reducing the risk of a regulatory challenge? What's the most cost effective, which was an important consideration because there are multiple ways to achieve this water quality objective. And finally, which one gets us out of the danger zone the quickest? And that ultimately recommended the reconstruction of the full facility. A further financial evaluation took a look at this and identified that this was also the lowest cost option over the same time period. So although upfront the costs may look different, over the course of the facility's life, the savings would be coming forward. So that gets you kind of a little bit through the how did we get here and how did we make the recommendation to council that was ultimately proved forward. Now into our project team development. Here in the room with me today, I have a few representatives from our project team. I'll ask them to just sort of wave in your general direction. We have our partners and our joint venture between our two contractors, Sunt and PCL Construction. We've got Caden Clint with us today. We have John Westervelt with our PMCM team and Ben Lee, who is our design engineer all the way in the back there. Like good engineers and contractors, they're as far away from the teacher as they possibly can be, but But you'll notice in the next couple slides, they get to the front row and they're right in the front of the class when we start talking about problem solving. So the objectives for this section is to share with you that the staff worked really hard to establish project objectives at the very beginning. So we knew what success looked like before we had ever sketched a concrete box or written a specification. We wanted to know what we wanted to achieve. The best value philosophy has served us extraordinarily well as we've gone through some very trying economic times in the last 18 to 24 months. So first up, I'm sure no one has forgotten that things have been a little weird, but we started this project during the height of the pandemic. And so trying to get 25 or 30 people all working together is really, really challenging. So someday I'm going to stop putting Rebecca's head in a giant picture on this, but this is the only photo I took from this workshop, so she's just going to have to deal with that. And so you've got her on Zoom, you've got another probably 25 people represented in these little squares over there, trying to get this really collaborative project meeting pulled together when we can't be physically together. Kurt's not as mad about the back of his head because he's not super obvious, like no one totally recognizes him, but poor Rebecca up there. But the important detail here is that before we even got anyone under contract, I told them, before I sign anything with you, you're coming to this stakeholder development process. You're giving me your time and we're figuring out how to do this project. This was in August of 2020. As you recall, we presented to council in April of 2020. Advertisements were due June of 2020. We interviewed July of 2020, and less than 2 weeks later, I had them in this room working through stakeholder development. So what did that come up with? So before we brought our contractor or our engineer in the room, staff worked with a technical advisor to establish these criteria for success on this project. We wanted to be sure that we understood, obviously value and cost are critical, but how do we measure all of the different things that don't have a dollar to them? How do we establish best value? And you'll see that what staff ranked was reliability, maintainability, flexibility, and future operation conditions as more important than even their own day-to-day operability. They wanted a facility that was going to serve us long into the future and be reliable and resilient. And this has helped us as we've made decisions as we go forward. The other thing that I'll point out is there are a handful of non-negotiables. You know, you can't have a facility that's intrinsically unsafe. You can't have a facility that's not going to meet regulations. So those were considered, you know, no alternatives that touch that space. I mentioned that contractors and engineers like to sit in the back of the room, but for this effort, they actually got it right up front. This was held as we looked at how to lay the facility out. For those of you that saw the first versions of these presentations, we suggested that because Nichols Park is immediately adjacent, it could be impacted in a groups, so representatives from each team scattered throughout this space, all working independently of each other. We laid out the facility in a way that now minimizes the impact to Nichols and maintains that community amenity, as well as maintaining its primary function as an opportunity in case there's a canal issue for that water to go someplace. So this was a really valuable effort. It was difficult to do because this was still in pandemic times. This was October of 2020, so not much better than August was. But we were able to do hybrid as well as in-person versions of this. And you'll notice there's lots of town staff, although it's hard to tell everyone from the back. We've got folks from planning and development services and others all in this team. So with that, jumping into our cost and program direction, some takeaways here. We took a comprehensive value engineering focused design stand down over the summer. For those of you that were on council in June of 2022, you received a memorandum from our staff advising you that due to the extraordinary economic pressures we were under, we wanted to take a design pause to truly deeply dive into value engineering. So that's piece one. The recommended program budget going forward is $545 million. And that the reconstructed plant will come online in early 2026. So what does that value engineering stand down achieve and what does it look like? The summary from it was value engineering was not something we first started in that process over the summer. We didn't go like, it's time, I guess. We had been doing it all along. So up till then, we had generated 75 different alternatives throughout the project, whether it was a material shift or a design change that were considered. But during the value engineering process, and it was intense, we're talking 45, 50 people in the public safety amphitheater over the course of 6 days, 2 weeks, minimal snacks. We weren't really nice to them either. We generated over 150 additional ideas. I'll walk through what that process looks like just so you can be familiar, although if you saw the public safety training facility, it's a very similar process in terms of what we took on. But it's hard because you generate these ideas and you want to like oh, that's a good idea, and you want to tear into it, but there's a process we follow to make sure each idea gets measured fairly and independently and considered along the way. One other piece we wanted to share with you is that our cost pressures, and we'll share with you a really interesting index mapper we're using. We are seeing those cost pressures start to level. I wish I could say that I was seeing declines across them, not yet, but we are seeing those major commodities starting to stabilize. And the other thing I wanted to share with this team is that when we reached out to council and asked for your consideration for that 120-day design stand down, we actually completed 30 days ahead of schedule. So we finished the VE effort in 90 days, and that's why we're able to come to you today, ready to present the full recommendation for your consideration. So this cost program recommendation, I share with you here what a typical VE process looks like. We gather information, we look at what are all the key functions of a facility, we ask ourselves, what are the most crazy creative ideas? Someone yells at the engineers because they want to start evaluating them immediately and they just want to tear into it, and you're like, no, just ideas. It's chaotic, but we have professionals that know how to wrangle us. We then go into a value analysis process, and every idea, unless it is completely unimaginably impossible to build, and out of the 150 plus, there were only 2, they got eliminated on first round for that, get more than 5 or 6 pages of Excel spreadsheets. It's heaven for me. It would probably be miserable for most of you, but there's pages and pages of review for every idea. We went as far as to look at whether or not the floors would get these little toe kicks. It only saved $1,500 and it probably would result in long-term drywall damage, so we didn't do it. But the idea was that we went that far in terms of the ideas we considered. The big shift between a typical process though and the process we undertook is we added this sorting step. Normally, as soon as an idea doesn't fit your overall program, you stop looking into it. But we wanted to do a full evaluation of every idea, give it its full merit, and then categorize it into our various possible models. So that we presented it to the council and to our leadership, we would be able to say, we literally left no stone unturned because we actually considered whether or not landscape should be included. All of this is then captured in that ongoing living design evolution log. So this design evolution log is continuing to be updated. This is not a one-time static process, it's an ongoing effort, but it was an extraordinary lift for that 90 days. So from that memorandum that was shared with the council in June, I wanted to provide an update on the items that have new information and those that are complete. So as you see here, the first one was that construction package 1, which was approved in January, and construction package 2, which was approved in June. We're either at or under budget. That's a great piece for us right now. That hasn't changed. The other item that hasn't changed is that we did conduct a value engineering design value focused stand down, and that was initiated to explore the widest range of alternatives we possibly could. That's complete and ahead of schedule. The other 3 items we'll share on the next slide with an update, and this is a part of our process to update the council as to where this project now is. So focusing on the 3 that have additional updates or information, we see that package 3, as we used to refer to it, and I say used to because I'm going to share with you a new packaging scheme that we're recommending, had the majority of the treatment complex. The 60% cost model showed a 35% escalation from February of 2021 to June of 2022. And finally, that the stand down would shift the overall project schedule by about the same number of days as we were down for that time period. So going through those as an update process, the first one is that we're recommending splitting package 3 into 2 packages, package 3 and package 4. It confuses even us. We have a big map in the trailer and we've used colors. So it's package purple and package green or package, help. We need help. So we go through and we weigh out all of these alternatives too, but I want to share why. We're not just splitting that package up because I love doing paperwork. There's a financial and a schedule benefit to splitting the packages up. The next is the cost. As evaluated it in June, the cost model was 35% higher than it was 18 months previous. Through the VE process, we reduced that overage by almost 40%, and we are now on target with the Mortenson Construction Index for this area for industrial construction, which is what this is. That index indicated 21.5% escalation over the same period. We are showing 21.6. That's as close as we could hope. We presented yesterday on a number of issues to the new council members about procurement and inflation. We presented that same material to council in June. We're seeing 25 and 40% escalation on most of our projects. So it's remarkable that a project this size is actually seeing inflation that's a little bit more in line with the larger industry. And the last is that the stand down would shift the overall project schedule by about 4 months. But in reality, we cut the schedule down by 30 days, and through repackaging, we'll be able to bring that facility on about 2 months after we originally planned. We originally looked at New Year's 2025. We're now looking at about 60 days beyond that. So a great opportunity by the team to split all this up. I mentioned that we had multiple cost models, and if you remember from the memo that was sent, we were going to look into 3 areas: a balanced model that honored all of the original project objectives, a scope model where any processes we could avoid building today and maybe build tomorrow, we would look into. We would also look at capital cost over life cycle cost where that made sense. And then finally, capital was what is the literal bare bones minimum we can construct to get a 60 MGD facility online. That's looking at things like how much emergency generation do you want, and really cutting as much of that back as far as you could. What we found, though, when we went through all of these evaluations was that the only model that could actually achieve the objectives of being financially responsible, long-term vision, and building for something for the future for the community was to recommend that balanced model. And the implications of that balanced model are that it honors our best value approach, which we committed to. We have a project charter. Many of you that came to the groundbreaking signed. I don't think it's legally binding, Chris. A poster? Probably not. But it allows us to maintain the commitment we made to the community back in 2020 that we were going to build a long-term facility looking towards the long-term expenditure, the long-term costs, and the long-term resiliency and our ability to serve water to this community. It also happens to have the lowest life cycle cost. That's not coincidental. We didn't wait the lines. We looked at every cost and everything that could come out of it, and it did come out as the lowest. The downside to it is it requires some complex construction sequencing. We're not just building an airplane while flying it, we're building it backwards and demolishing it as we go. So this is a really challenging effort. We'll kind of show you what that looks like on a couple of graphics here in a moment. But to share with you, the cost is in alignment with the industrial construction inflation indexes, and the system is now upgrade ready for the future. I want to be careful to mention that upgrade ready in this case is a regulation we're not currently aware of that could come up in the future. We have both physical and what we call hydraulic or available space on the facility to allow for additional treatment if needed. So with this, we're going to start a little video. This video is a Power BI dashboard that our contractors team put together, and it's going to show how we weighted the different models: balanced, scope, and impact. Balanced, scope, and capital. The impact score in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 100 items, 190 items, 100 items. Each idea is then impact. How much does this change the project from the base project objectives? So you'll notice when we click on this, those ideas carried from package 1 to package 2 to package 3. So ideas were considered across multiple packages if available, and then weighted against their impact. So the balance model only had an impact score of 2, a minor impact overall to the relative project. Unfortunately, this one just didn't quite animate the way we were hoping, but this is an impact score of 5 when it comes forward. And this one, if you only focused on this impact score, you get an impact of almost 7. So as you remove those ideas that are commonly held in order to get to the next savings bucket, so to speak, you're negatively impacting the project from its original objectives. So an overall impact score of 2.2, moderate impact score of 4, and a high impact score of 5. But again, that's why we wanted to show what happens when you turn off the underlying ideas that are shared in each package. The impact score starts to really grow, and the delta in the cost is not as substantial as you would have expected. So with that, our cost model summary. Under the balanced recommendation, we're moving forward with the original project objectives. We did go system by system. We looked at systems that had intrinsic resiliency and then compared that about whether we did an N+1 type design. So if an existing piece of equipment has resiliency within it, do we need 3 of them or can we only build 2? Took that on a process by process basis. We wanted to balance the efficiency of the plant with its ability to respond to emergencies. And ultimately, what we'd share with you is that the cost model presented in February of 2021 was $457 million. The cost model update as of June of this year was $575, and what we're recommending going forward is $545 million. The asterisk is not because we're trying to hide anything. We just wanted to share this is a cost model. We are continuing to value engineer and identify alternatives. Just yesterday, we had a presentation with an emergency backup generation company that would use natural gas instead of diesel and may actually save the town money long term by allowing us to do some energy efficiency planning through peak shaving and other opportunities along the way. So we're not done with this process. This is the snapshot in time at the end of the most recent VE effort. So with that, I mentioned before that we are splitting the package up, and it's really difficult to understand, even for me some days, how many packages we're really looking at. So in green, hard to tell that that's actually new, but that's the new solids handling facility that's under construction now, anticipated to come online in early March. That's making way so that we can eliminate the solids drying beds that are now under that orange that represents our underground and deep structure piping. That was procured in June of this year, so that was approved by council. In purple, and now with new roads, is the new treatment complex, as well as the new chemical building and administrative facilities. There's a little bit outside the fence there, and then as you come in, the new GAC building appears, as well as this is a big tank structure. And in the last phase, we remodel and repurpose existing buildings and build our new pre-sedimentation tanks. So as I mentioned, we build this plant backwards, and to simplify it, we'll do some magic and turn off the ground and then go ahead and have that underground piping show up so you can appreciate how much structure is really in this site that has to be built while this whole facility can't come offline for more than a few hours. So it's a credit to the team that they're going to be able to do all this. We're doing this now every day to keep it so that the public continues to receive that safe, reliable, and resilient water, and they don't see a change in their service. For those of you that were like, that's a lot of things turning on and off, here's a simplified version of the 5 packages we're now recommending. The benefit of this package is it will reduce the schedule by about 2.5 months overall on the whole project, which isn't super amazing on a 5-year project, but it's better than going longer. But it will also save the project about $3.5 million. If we waited until every design package was completely ready as we had originally structured it, there'd be 60 to 90 days where the contractor would be on site but have no work to do. And so in order to keep those staff available, that would be a substantial cost to us versus keeping them busy and moving and helping us keep that staffing ratio even so folks are not spinning up and then spinning back down again. I mentioned that we're not done value engineering. Some of the things we're continuing to look at now that we have completed 15 months of piloting out at the North Plant. We ran a 1/6000th scale, 15 gallon per minute version of the treatment plant for 1.5 years almost. We now know that we don't need 2 ozone dosage points, back to ozone, that original project that first got us all spun up. We wanted to make sure, is the ozone in the right place? Is it the right dose? So the price we had in the 60% cost model assumed 1 dosage. Now we have piloting information that's shared with us. We can lower that dosage, potentially reduce the cost of that equipment. We're going back to market. That going back to market saved $3 million on GMP2 by repricing that pipe. We went to as far as to go out to the package 5, which is those pre-sedimentation basins. We're looking at what it would take to go from 360-ish foot basins to 2 slightly larger basins with the same treatment impact, but less footprint and less cost to construct. And then on the overall, we're still continuing to look at contingency, general conditions, and general requirements. We're looking at construction rate efficiencies as well. We have an ongoing PPI tracker, a producer price index tracker I'll share on the next slide. We're looking at just-in-time purchase and market optimization, and it's stated here as a shared savings clause. What we mean by that is finding ways to incentivize our team to continue to identify savings even after the contracts are issued, because that continued diligence, that continued focus on best value can't stop just because the pencils are down from the engineer's perspective. On the next slide, it'll start animating immediately, so I'll speak to it before I start it. The contractors team has put together a Power BI dashboard that scrapes the producer price index. We then focus those on the most important commodities for this project, because obviously the producer price index has everything from alfalfa through nickel and through steel. We wanted to focus on what was really impacting this job so we can track it, because what the producer's paying impacts the manufacturer's final cost and then would impact our buy. So if we start to see a producer price level off or even decline, that will help us inform on purchases. So with that, this PPI index will kick on here, and you'll see to the left, it'll be a data point at the very beginning when we took that initial cost model of the project. And since then, this is just a representative of the volatility. This is 100% up here, 50% here. So you'll see some items like the blue line here have actually declined and kind of leveled off. Others continue to be really volatile, and that helps us understand. Along the top is a ticker telling you where we are. This updates monthly with the Bureau of Labor Statistics data dumps, and it's helping us keep an eye on what we're doing. You can pause it if you have a particular interest in a particular material. It's like the worst stock ticker in history in that particular capacity because it's never money that I'm getting. But regardless, you wanted to see what number 2 diesel fuel is doing. Why do we care about number 2 diesel? That's what's in our construction equipment. That's what runs the excavators. Versus in this case, fabricated steel plate appears to be leveling off. So if we're getting close to a structural steel purchase, we now know that we're paying similar to the price that we would have paid if we'd bought 2 months ago. We can make a decision based off of what we see. So we're using this as a tool going forward to make sure that those purchases and those buys are happening at the best possible time. So with that, the only thing I want to make sure I pointed out is the graphic you saw of the plant. We're not painting it purple and yellow. We're still, I know. I'm sorry, Mayor Peterson. I know you would love for it to be purple, but but we'll be presenting a rendering soon that'll have the form inlays that will impact this exterior wall, what you'd see from the Nichols Park if you were down there with your family. But did want to make sure that you folks were aware that next week we'll be going before the Planning Commission for consideration of our special use permit. Special use permit is something that the town requires of certain kinds of construction, including agri-tainment, PD and fire stations. This facility needs one for the construction that we're currently going through. It doesn't have one in place. So we're going through this process. Just wanted to share that we will be at the Planning Commission next week. If you want to see this presentation again, but really, really short, just focusing on what the plan is, I'll probably be giving it again. And then with that, this is a flyover of the facility so you can have an appreciation for just how much was going to change. 2 changes from what you see here to what's going to be in the future. Those square basins will be demolished in the last phase, so they're shown here because they're not impacted in the construction. This is an emergency recovery basin. It is not a secret fishing pond. It's not normally full of water. This is what happens when you let the architects go loose, but they they mean well. So we flew past the solids handling. We're going to come around to the treatment complex. As you'll see here, we're only intruding into Nichols Park a little bit. We're using a fence and some structures to minimize our intrusion down that slope. So you'll still be able to play sports and take photos, although there will be some changes visually to that space. This is the treatment complex. If you've been out to the Santan plant, it's going to look very, very similar, just a little bit bigger. Same treatment processes, with the new step being the granulated activated carbon, which functions as a polishing step to help remove those organics. Those organics are basically the leaves and the material that are breaking down on the water that we have to remove, and that they form that disinfection byproduct when they interact with our disinfectant chlorine. One new change in terms of if you were driving past, there will be a new driveway that goes out to Guadalupe Road to facilitate truck traffic in and out of that GAC space. The other thing is, no, the roads won't be fluffy. This was our rendering, so the asphalt won't be super squishy. I'm sure Councilmember Kaprowski, you're like, what are you guys building out there? But it's just to sort of highlight existing and future roadways through here. One thing to point out, our north reservoirs here on the north end of the site, those are not changing in a substantial way. The evaluation and condition assessment indicated that those were appropriate for reuse. And that's not actually an empty box, that's a finished water pump station. So not everything got rendered, but we wanted to show the majority of the facility for your consideration here, just to give you a sense of how much will be changing on site. In Nichols Park, if you want to build them there. Not anymore. Cricket. Yes. So if you got to the end of that 43-ish slides and you wanted to know kind of what are the most important messages, it's actually probably in almost reverse order for me, although others may disagree. I think the most important thing is we have built a team that understands front to back, left to right, that the work they do today is benefiting a community of over 250,000 folks, most of whom will never have the opportunity to know them or shake their hand. So they're doing work that matters. They're doing work that's important. It's something that whenever they put me on the spot and ask me to make a comment to the craft and crews that are out there that I try to reinforce, 250,000 people in the community are saying thank you. And they're saying, no, thank you for the opportunity to build something meaningful for this community going forward. That's been the most important thing for me. Time is of the essence. With everything going on the Colorado River and elsewhere, we can't afford to step back on this effort because we need this facility available to provide safe, resilient water for our community, and that the existing facility was unable to meet those needs as it existed. So we have a new challenge statement, and we've shared this before. The previous one, the North Plant, has exhausted. It was a statement that shared where staff was kind of at. What are we going to do? This is a lot. How do we carry this forward? How are we going to bear this? But instead now it's, I think, a much more positive focus. Where do we go from here type of message? How do we provide safe, resilient water that surpasses local and national drinking water standards sustainably? And when we say sustainably, we mean dollars, we mean the environment, we mean the community all together into the future. So before I go to the next slide and close out for questions, I wasn't sure if our construction or project team wanted to add anything or correct me on anything. If they're smart, they won't correct me. But I wasn't sure if you guys had anything you wanted to add from the back there. Good answer. So Ben has been dying ever since we decided to go to 5 packages. He says we needed a project theme song. And so we rewrote the lyrics to Lou Bega's incredible hit Mambo No. 5 to be about a construction project. I'm going to work with Dana and the digital team to get that. Okay. We're going to hold her to that. We're Indeed. In case you weren't and didn't know, I actually did teach youth art for a long time, so I'm pretty good at that. But with that, we are grateful for the opportunity to provide this update on the North Plant project. This is an incredible opportunity to do something meaningful for the community today and going forward. I know that a lot of folks kind of get to come in here and say things like, oh, this is going to be terrible, but we got a plan. This is part of the plan, and I'm grateful to be a part of that plan going forward. And a tremendous appreciation for our operations teams who helped with the initial problem development, who helped with the MOPOs we do today and are continuing to maintain that compliance while we get the easy job of building the cool project.
I was waiting because I didn't know if you were just going to take a breath and keep going.
We're ready. All right, here we go. So Land Use 2.0. So it has this name because at a previous retreat, we had a discussion about some different land use topics, and we wanted to have a we will walk through today. We'll start with infill and redevelopment. Then we'll touch a little bit on mixed use. Staff has been working on a mixed use ordinance that we're going to introduce to the council at a study session on January 21st. So we wanted to give you a little heads up as to what that looked like and how that kind of fits into some of the infill and redevelopment projects. As part of an overall discussion on affordable housing in the Valley, you've probably seen some articles and discussions about guest quarters and secondary dwelling units. So I was just going to talk very briefly and very high level about how the town of Gilbert handles those. And then just kind of walk through our process. A lot of times people talk about the development process and it gets a little cloudy or a little confusing. So I thought I'd just kind of walk through a little bit of how some of these go. I've got some really good flow charts for design review board. And then if something needs a rezoning and a general plan amendment. So we'll have kind of a good opportunity to see how our projects go through the process. So to start with, I figured we'd start with just two definitions so that we started on the same page. So infill development is the development of vacant or partially developed parcels that fully abut developed properties. And we're seeing a lot of this now. And I've got a lot of examples, and you've probably seen it in your handouts, of where we're seeing more and more infill development. And we're seeing a lot of infill development because, quite frankly, a lot of the green fields are gone. We only have a few large tracts left, a few areas that don't have much development surrounding them. So we get into the infill development. And as you've seen and as you know, the infill development and redevelopment comes with a lot of different challenges. So we will talk through some of those as well. And this is a definition that's directly out of our land development code. Redevelopment, on the other hand, is any new construction on a site that has pre-existing uses. It represents a process of land development uses to revitalize the physical, economic, and social fabric of an urban space. So what you're really doing is redeveloping a site. You're taking a site that has maybe lost its useful life, and you're starting over. You're putting a new use, a new building on it, kind of starting from scratch in the hopes of some economic vitality and, like I said, the redevelopment. And of course, as everybody knows, probably the biggest and best example of redevelopment in Gilbert is the Heritage District. You can see in this picture here where we kind of started. You know, this is Zinberger, this is the rest of the marketplace there. So this is now that at the top. So you can see how it's changed definitely over time. And it continues to do so. I just thought these pictures were pretty good to show how things have changed. And obviously, as part of the redevelopment, there was land assemblage, there was development that occurred. So yeah, there's a lot of change that's happened in the area. And as I mentioned, it completely changed not only the physical area, but the economic and social fabric of that area. So what was one time, maybe some houses or some of those other things, now a very vibrant economic driver in Gilbert. Redevelopment also doesn't just have to be commercial. It can be residential, or it doesn't have to be just residential. It can be commercial. It's a lot of different things. So we'll kind of bounce through some of these examples that we've seen in the last few years. So this example is the Carson. So this is on Gilbert Road. It's just south of Gilbert Town Square. This is the one that's just south of Sal's Pizza there across from Town Hall. 2.8 acres. This zoning went from shopping center to multifamily medium. It's 8 two-story buildings, 40 units, and it comes in at about 14 dwelling units an acre. One of the challenges or interesting things about this is you can see in this picture, it was an old home at one point in time. So I honestly don't know if it was the farmstead for the entire area or if it was just a home that was constructed that fronted onto Gilbert Road. But you can see it was a house. It was due for redevelopment. There are single family homes along the south, which give us a little bit of context in which to play. You've got commercial on the west, which I believe that's the bowling alley, and then you've got Sal's and Phoenician and everybody there to the north. So as we look at the development, we have to kind of figure out how is this going to fit in there and again fit into that context of the area. This was an aerial, it's an older aerial, but you can see where it's under construction. Again, what I kind of wanted to point out, and you can see it on this, is we had the single family structures to the south, so we provided more of a buffer on the south. So you've got the pool, you've got the drive aisle, you don't have necessarily the buildings right up against the other single family homes. That's not so important on the west side or the north side because you've got commercial development, so you kind of know what you're getting into if you moved into those developments. Examples of what the building elevations look like. And then here's what it looks like today. So this one's constructed. I believe they're leasing right now. But I thought this picture was pretty good as well because you could see some of the commercial to the north and you could see that the height is starting to match and you're sort of compatible with what's to the north. It doesn't show the houses to the south, but at least you can kind of see that it's compatible with what's to the north. The next one is the Wyatt Apartment. So this one is on Gilbert Road as well. This is south of the public safety facility. So these guys back right up to the parking garage there that's on the south side of the public safety facility. 10 acres. This one went from office to multifamily medium. And office was kind of a tough play there because it's kind of mid-block. There isn't really a lot of other office around it other than ours. So a little bit difficult. This went to multifamily medium, again, 6 buildings. These were 3 stories tall, 216 units, about 21 units per acre. Again, you can kind of see where we started. There was a house up front, really nothing in the back. We always knew that this would redevelop, this property to the south would redevelop at some point. You can see the parking structure there to the north, and then we've got single family to the east. And really, I think you can even see, well, you can see the old house there where the one we just talked about that was south of Sal's. So this is the aerial while it was under construction. Again, you can see we've pushed everything away from the single family homes. Not so important against the easement and the public facility to the north. And then we knew this would redevelop, so there's a little bit of buffer there to the south as well. And I'm saying these kind of things so you can understand some of the context that we play in as we look at these redevelopment requests as they come forward. These were the building elevations in the site plan. Again, you can see a lot of their landscape setback and buffer to the east was detention. The rest of it was sort of parking lot and landscaping. And then this is what it looks like today. So you can see at one point we went from this to a facility that now looks like this. Very nice amenities, nice pool, outdoor seating areas. I mean, it definitely changes the fabric and the economics of that piece of property. Andalusia Villas. This is an interesting one. This one has received mixed reviews, I would say, is a good way to put it. One of the things I've always really enjoyed about the town of Gilbert is there's a lot of different choices in housing, whether it be large lot or equestrian or smaller lots or tract homes. We've got some 3-story facilities. Whatever, it always seems to be that there's some type of product for anybody that wants to live in Gilbert or wants to move around in Gilbert. So this is southwest corner of Val Vista and Ray, 14 acres. Even at 101 units, it's only about 7 units an acre. The thing with this one is it's a very tight development, and I think that's where it's begun to get its mixed reviews. 2-story buildings, pretty tight, small lots. You can see what it looked like previously. But again, there's single family to the south, single family to the west, commercial to the north and to the east. So there really wasn't an issue of buffering, obviously, along the arterials. But they created the big open space here with there's a walking path. Tried to create a buffer here in order to separate these uses, appease the neighbors' concerns, and create some sort of transition then that would help with the development.
For sale units, that's not for rent.
Right, I believe so, yeah. Here's what the building elevations look like when they came through. A picture of the site plan. Again, you can see the open space and retention, trying to provide that buffer. And then I just grabbed a couple of pictures of the existing buildings off of their current website. But it's a different product for sure. But again, one that we see as part of trends in the marketplace. Not all of these projects become very dense. A lot of them try to start that way. As staff, we look at a lot of projects that come in and immediately put up red flags and concerns and talk about support or no support for different reasons. This is one of those that really tried to up the density to start with, and we had to have some long discussions with them about surrounding land uses and staff support. So this is Lindsay and Galveston. It's on the west side of the road, 12 acres. This one actually went from SF 43 to SF 35, so not a huge jump in zoning. The 43 is 43,000 square foot lots. They went to 35,000 square foot lots. So a little bit of an increase in density, but not a great deal. And this came out at a little over 1 unit per density, or 1 unit per acre. That's the site. You can see there's a couple houses that front Lindsay Road. You've got larger lot along the south, larger lot along the west and the north. Can't remember off the top of my head if the surrounding land is all in the town or if some of it's county island, but it doesn't really matter. We still have to look at the land uses that are there and have these be compatible. So this is what they came back with. 35,000 square foot lots for the majority of it. Here's 46,000, 38, 37 in the middle. So we try to have those lot sizes that were compatible with the ones to the south. Putting a development that we looked at that was south of Sal's, the Wyatt, where it's 2 stories, 14 units an acre, just would not be compatible, would not fit in this location. So we had a lot of conversations with the folks, and this is finally what was brought through and approved. I don't have any house pictures for you because it's not under construction quite yet. So here's another one that's interesting. This is at the southeast corner of Greenfield and Superstition Drive. Again, kind of one of those larger areas, or one of those larger lot developments. It wasn't necessarily, they didn't try to jam too much density in there, and we really wouldn't support it given some of the surrounding land uses. Went from SF43 to SF15, and this is only about 1.5 units per acre. This is the Christian school. I forgot the name of it. I had it. Gilbert Christian School. To the north is a Lennar project. This was another Reed Porter project. And this is the site we were talking about here. That's why it's called the Orchard. So I want to give you a little bit context too. Along the north side there where the orchard ends, that's Superstition Drive. And I want to say that because the next picture shows the development. This is Superstition Drive. So we've flipped everything. I just want you to be able to see the context. But again, knowing that you've got kind of a transition happening between some smaller lots and a school into some larger lots, and then maybe even some larger lots to the east of that. This is one of those developments that took a little bit of time to work through to get that transition. There was opposition from the neighbors to the east, but I think everything worked through pretty well, and this was the project that was ultimately approved. Other infill and development examples that we've seen and that we've had discussions on, obviously that Kohl's Shopping Center at Cooper and Baseline. They came in, and that was the southwest corner of Cooper and Baseline. There was an existing shopping center there. They came through and removed a portion of the residential and ended up constructing multifamily on it. I believe in that one, staff was against the proposal. But it's moved forward. I believe it's under construction now. We've had several discussions about the southeast corner of Gilbert and Guadalupe. There's a new Starbucks in that location. We've had some other projects being discussed in front of the big lots there, where some folks have talked about buildings with some significant height, which might be okay. It's going to depend. We'd have to look at it. There's not a lot of height in that area, so depending upon the height, we'd really need to take a look at it. The Northwest Corridor is another great example of some infill and redevelopment we've seen. There are empty lots still in that area, so we're seeing some new development of some smaller industrial buildings in that area, but we've also seen some redevelopment of some sites too. Aldi's is coming to council shortly. This is on Arizona Avenue. They're going to be tearing down the old auto use that was there. And there's a rezoning there to build the grocery store and some multifamily around that. Fry's at Val Vista and Baseline is a very interesting one. We've had a lot of conversations on over the years, but nothing's moved forward. So just south of that Fry's, up against the lake, there's a lot of empty dirt that has never developed, and nobody's ever come forward with it. It's a difficult piece because it's zone commercial. There's no frontage onto any roads. It's very hard to see. So I wouldn't be surprised if that one wasn't a ripe piece where somebody would come in and want to put some multifamily up against the water with the views. But we haven't seen anybody come forward with anything like that. And then once that was the craze were all the CVS and Walgreens on every single corner. And those are starting to fade and go away. So we've seen these turn into the 4-wheel drive store at Williams Field and Gilbert. There's a church, I believe that one is at Ray and Lindsay. So there's been a couple different ones that have turned. Oh, and there's another one that turned into a real estate agency at. Yeah, there you go. So we're seeing some interesting uses come back out of those sites as well. In an attempt to kind of get a snapshot of what we could be looking at, and I'm sure everybody's going to look at this and say, hey, wait a minute, you're missing this side or that side. But I ask our IT team, the GIS guys, to just quickly pull anything that's between 5 and 20 acres that could have a potential for redevelopment. So they didn't do any kind of analysis on the land. They just said, okay, these parcels are between 5 and 20 acres, and here they are. So you'll notice, for example, in the Northwest Corridor, a lot of those are, you're not seeing a lot lit up. Well, most of those are less than the 5 acres, so they're not showing up as on here. But you can see there's still quite a bit of areas that we could potentially see redevelopment or development on. And these won't be the easiest of pieces because a lot of them are surrounded by other development, and we'll really have to look at the character of the area and what's going on around it in order to try to fit those developments in. Because really we don't want, underutilized dirt anywhere in the town. We'd like to develop it out as best as we possibly can. So why are some of these vacant and some aren't? I took a stab at this, and you'll probably think of some other reasons as well. But a lot of times we've seen where, somebody owned 50 acres, 100 acres, 20 acres, whatever. They want to keep the farmstead, but Shea Homes is ready to develop. So they sell them off 15 acres, they keep 5 acres, they build the subdivision around it, and then you end up with a piece. And as soon as the parents are done living in that house and it's time for redevelopment, what are you going to do? How are you going to infill that? In a lot of instances, we can plan for those subdivisions around it so there's connections, and then you ultimately kind of fit it back in there. But that always isn't the case in some of the older developments. So those are difficult. Access is always a big thing too. Coming back in, are these parcels going to only have right in, right out? Can they even get 2 points of access? Can they meet the fire safety requirements that we have for our first responders? Difficult surroundings. What's around it? Are there railroad tracks? Is it pushed up against an industrial area, and these guys want to go residential, different things like that, strange shaped lots. We've got a lot of triangles and just odd, you'll get ones that are 100 feet wide and 1,000 feet deep. And, I guess you put a spaghetti farm on it or something, but I mean, it's a very odd shaped piece of ground. So spaghetti farm, very long, very long. A lot of times the price of land also will keep something from developing. We've seen that a number of times. If the projects won't pencil, the property will just sit vacant for a while. And then, as we've seen recently too, the willingness of an owner to sell. If they don't want to sell and they don't want to move on, the price will or the property will just sit there in an undeveloped state for a while. So what are some of the concerns? I've touched on some of them as we were talking. What are the concerns that staff looks at when projects come forward for an infill or redevelopment that's, not a vacant site in the middle of nowhere where we don't have to worry about too many things? One is density. That's always important. I hit on some of those with the larger lot subdivisions that you've seen, and even with the one south of Sal's. I mean, that transition between the single family and the commercial was pretty important. So we always look at the density and how it's going to fit into that area. Setbacks, we've had a lot of discussions about, and this kind of goes along with the height too, maybe we want to set back 1 or 2 story structures further from single family homes that are 1 story. And we have to work closely with the developer on a lot of those, but can we push those, can we get those setbacks? Can we do an increased setback where we've got additional landscaping in the green space and maybe some of the amenities so that those setbacks provide that buffer again then to the adjacent properties. Traffic isn't always an issue, and really it doesn't matter if it's a brand new project or infill or redevelopment. It's always an issue, and there's always a perception wrapped around it, but it's something we need to take a very close look at, because what is it going to do to some of those locations? The Wyatt was a good example. Trying to line up those driveways with what was across the street becomes a little difficult, because not only do you have the entrance to the back of the public safety facility there, but you've also got the entrance to the shopping center to the north. So you've got to kind of play this game where you're lining things up, and that's very difficult sometimes when it comes to some redevelopment parcels. Architecture, we always look at the character of the area and how is this going to fit. We want to make sure that there's some type of compatibility between some things in order to make it look like it's not an afterthought or something new, but again, kind of matching that fabric of the community. Character of the area, same way. If we're in Morrison Ranch or Gateway or the Heritage District, we really need to pay attention to what's around there and ensure that we're following the goals and the policies and the plans that we've set out in the past. And then the land development code. Our land development code is really set up for new development. As we start to get into more redevelopment and things like that, we've really had to take a look at it and figure out the best way to do some things. There isn't a lot of flexibility in some of it. And if it says a 40-foot setback, it's a 40-foot setback. And how does that work on some of these projects? It may or may not. And so that can really hamper whether or not a project can go forward. And then if there's a deviation requested, staff has to determine the desirability of that setback, and is there a good story to be told as to why that should change? What is the benefit to making that change? I'll pause there just for a minute to see if there's any questions, concerns, or discussions on infill or redevelopment before I jump into a real high overview of mixed use. Moving on, are we good? Okay. Just going to give you a real high level overview of the mixed use ordinance. As I mentioned, this will be coming to council a study session on January 21st. It's been to the chamber. Thank you, Sarah. They loved it. Thought it was great. Greatest presentation ever. It's been to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, it felt like it. The Planning Commission has seen it. They recommended approval of moving it forward. Right now, we've got it out to, Amanda helped us send it out to some folks at the ULI. They've got a kind of a redevelopment group. So we've got some developers in that area looking at it. Nationwide's taken a look at it. Some of the other zoning attorneys in the area have looked at it. So we've got several folks that have given us feedback on it. So Urban Land Institute. So, yeah. So this would be the proposed definition that we would put in there. And you can see we start putting things together. So, integrates two or more distinctive uses, cohesive pedestrian-oriented environment. Again, we're trying to get back to something that actually is more of that mixed use. If you'll remember, back a while ago, we had the regional commercial zoning district, and in regional commercial, you can do loft above, and that was sort of our mixed use zoning area. Well, you could also do standalone apartments with a use permit, but you had to show that these standalone apartments in regional commercial somehow met this mixed use type thing. And there was a lot of confusion, a lot of projects that came through that were approved through that use permit. We seem to always be battling with developers about it. So eventually we just pulled the use permit and the multifamily out of regional commercial, not to handle that. Okay, so several years go by and we start to see projects where now we really want to use this mixed use tool, but we really don't have anything. And I'll show you an example here in a minute. But this is one of the things where, we probably should have done this a couple of years ago, but now that there's an impetus to do it, we're moving it forward. Here's some of the examples that we're talking about around town. Obviously, Epicenter at Agritopia. We even kind of consider Gilbert Town Square across, west of Gilbert Town Hall, a mixed use development. And there's a multifamily back there. There's some office. There's a lot of retail. So, it's horizontal. Yes, it's not the true, planning vertical mixed use, but we're trying to kind of get to some of that. Same way with Verde at Cooley Station. The medical office is getting ready to break ground. Most of the commercial isn't right now. There's multifamily to the south, but it's one development that kind of came together. And then obviously Heritage North too. You've got the office, you've got the retail, you've got the restaurants, you've got the hotel. Just another picture of Epicenter. This is the one I was talking about that's creating some difficulties for staff. This is directly south of Epicenter, so it's at the southwest corner of Higley and Ray. So they've proposed a mixed-use development that's somewhat similar to Epicenter. What you see in kind of the outlined in red would be a commercial portion. The yellow would be more of the multifamily. And let me get to this because this is interesting. So it's 15 acres. And the request to rezone is to 3 acres of general commercial, 8 acres of multifamily, and 2.9 acres of shopping center. So instead of us having a mixed-use zoning district where this would all fit under one zoning district, it's nice and clean, we're now carving that piece of property up into 3 different areas and 3 different zoning districts. And it also makes it very interesting because Chris and his people in legal don't like us to draw zoning lines through buildings, which I completely understand. So we're trying to kind of put all of this stuff together. So this is one that you'll see soon. I'm using it as an example as December 13th council meeting, yes. So, and by the way, this is also one of those projects that came in completely different than what it looks like now.
It used to be in August of last year, and I said no. No, it was all townhomes. There was no
They probably drop a lot of drive-throughs as a commercial.
Yeah. Yeah, all along Elliott Road. Yeah, it was kind of stripped out, yeah. As we bring forward the the mixed use, you'll see 3 different districts. There's a small, a large, and a regional. And it's meant to handle different size of properties. So is it the Rivulon site? Is it a smaller 30-acre site, or is it some piece that maybe is this piece south of Sal's, where we could have had a coffee shop on the first floor and maybe some retail above it. We also have an amended use table. So we've looked at what can be allowed in these different land use districts, and we're putting those into the new use tables. Some of this will require some amendments to the other land development code sections, whether it be setbacks or landscaping or parking, but you'll see those as they come forward. And then we'll also have design guidelines that can be used by everybody to really kind of help understand what this is and what this means. And then they can make a determination whether or not they'd like to apply for mixed use or not. We are not going to go in and zone anything mixed use right off the bat. This is going to be a tool that the developers or applicants or property owners could come forward and ask for a rezoning. Like they can come forward now and ask for general office. They'd be able to come forward and ask for mixed use. But the reason I wanted to show you this is there's a lot going on with the mixed use district. We've really done a lot of research and a lot of hard work to determine how this will play out, and we're getting that feedback from those groups I mentioned, which will help us make sure that this is a tool that can be used. And I fully understand and expect that we'll go through a time or two, and there'll be a tweak here or there that we'll have to come back with. But at least I think we're putting the right foot forward. This is the small, these are just some examples, but I was talking about, less than 10 acres. It corresponds to these different general plan amendment or general plan categories. The medium is a little bit larger than, maybe a little more density. Again, you can see the different districts. And you can kind of start to see too the scale that we're talking about. So much smaller type developments. Then we step up. This is the Gilmore. This is the one at the northwest corner of Val Vista and Germain.
The Gilmore.
Yeah. And then, and I think Epicenter would actually fall in that as well. And then this is more of the Rivulon type of development where it's a larger piece, but they still want to have some flexibility and some mixed use that they can work with. So,
Kyle, remind me, when we did the land development code update, we did not do the land use chapter, correct?
we didn't do the parking chapter.
Which part? Parking?
The parking's under review right now.
It's a chapter we didn't do.
Yeah, I think it was the parking because not too long ago, we'd gone through and revamped our land use charts. So we had a consultant look at that maybe, 8-10 years ago. But when we did the refresh, we put it in a better format so people could understand it.
So Kyle, could you go back to small?
Yeah.
And help me visualize where that would land today in Gilbert. Because it's a pretty small,
So
under.
I'll just pick an example. Let's do the northwest corner of Gilbert and Elliott. So less than 10 acres. We want multifamily above retail, perfect for mixed use. So.
But you wouldn't see that as a project, I'll just say south of our police department. That particular project, I wouldn't see that.
No, I don't know that we would want to put retail south of there. I don't know that would fit real well.
Yeah, I just didn't think it would have the visibility. So I guess where I'm getting at is a lot of these infill projects that we see probably will not have this.
It might not.
Be in a corner or.
It's going to depend upon where it's located and if retail's even viable. Yeah, but it's a tool that can be used if they want to. One of the things we struggled with, we had a brand new apartment complex go in on Santan Village Parkway. It's between Santan Village Parkway and Greenfield there. It's that middle piece. They wanted to do, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the right piece. It's the apartment complex that's going in by Mountainside Fitness just to the north. They wanted to do a coffee shop and a little bit of retail. We don't have a tool for them to put a coffee shop out for people driving by to come in. It's either multifamily or it's commercial. We don't have that mixture right now. So this would allow.
Construction,
Huh?
Novell, under
Yeah.
construction?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Again, very high level on that, kind of a picture of the design guidelines. We really want to try to make this user friendly as we go forward. This is just the timeline. This dot star should be over here, but we plan on bringing it to the study session in January. I think this is a January 21st meeting, and then we can establish a time to bring it back for approval. There's 2 meetings in February, so if we can't hit February, we could hit early March for sure. All right. Accessory structures, well, guest quarters and secondary dwellings. Again, this is very high level. I just wanted to point out what the town currently allows as far as these items. Guest quarters. So guest quarters are meant for temporary housing of non-paying guests. So this is the mother-in-law's quarter. This is your brother-in-law's coming in town. You got a buddy coming in, something like that. It's just meant to have like a casita or something out there for somebody to stay in. It's basically allowed in all of the different zoning districts. An AUP is required. An AUP is an administrative use permit. So there is a staff review that goes through this. We want to make sure that it's compatible with the surrounding areas, that it doesn't encroach on anything. We want to make sure that it's okay and would issue that AUP. There's 1 per lot is allowed. We don't want to turn it into an apartment complex. We want to allow somebody to have the ability to have a spot for somebody to stay, not 30 people to stay. It's within the building envelope. Within the building envelope, so it meets all of the setback requirements, can be attached to the main structure or detached from the main structure. This is kind of important. These 2 are important. Same utility service as primary and no kitchens. And again, that's meant to be not so that it turns into a rental somehow. We don't want, 2 different structures on the same lot and one is being rented out. Because now we've turned this single-family lotted subdivision into 2 single-family homes on each lot. I mean, now it becomes something completely different. To get away from that, though, so this would be your guest quarters. If it's a secondary dwelling unit, same type of thing, same zoning districts, AUP, 1 per lot within the building envelope, unless it's over a detached garage. So sometimes detached garages can sit outside of the building envelope depending upon where they're allowed. Attached or detached, same utility services. This is where now we would allow the full kitchen. And this is one that actually could be rented. So it is a little bit different, but it still goes through that administrative use permit process. We always look at the architecture to make sure it doesn't look different than the neighborhood, that it fits within the neighborhood. And then because it's basically a separate structure, a separate dwelling unit, parking is required. So there is a requirement for additional parking to be placed. So as you hear all of these discussions about affordable housing and what are different places doing, and the house committees are meeting, it's just want you to know that we do have things in place, and we have had things in place for quite a while to allow some more flexibility in our zoning to allow for some of these guest quarters and secondary dwelling units. I believe Gilbert was one of the first 2 that partnered with Lennar, and we did the next gen homes. It was 1 house, but they had 2 kitchens in it. And at first everybody was freaked out because, oh no, this is a duplex. Well, we worked with them so that there was a free flow between them. So if you had parents that wanted to live in the area over here, but you still needed to take care of them, but they wanted to cook and do their own thing, they could, but there was still a free flow. So it wasn't like a duplex type thing where it's 2 separate families. You either that or you really liked whoever you were living with. But then you could have those two different kitchens and work that way.
Kyle?
All right, I know I'm running long.
Kyle?
Yeah.
Can they conduct a home occupation out of one of those or both of them?
They can do home occupations at them. Yeah, sure. Our home occupation requirements are very flexible. I mean, we've done quite a bit to ensure that people can do a lot out of their homes as long as they're not negatively impacting the neighborhood. We don't want, we don't want employees showing up. We don't want signs on the houses. We don't want things like that. But otherwise, we're pretty flexible in working through home mods. Yeah.
My concern with it is, can we relax it to a point of in-law quarters back with having a kitchen? Because you're talking, are you trying to process it all the way through to a secondary dwelling unit when you could have in-law quarters, you could have your elderly parents living in the back and still want to be able to cook their meal, but you want them there, or whatever, your son, you want to put him out there. He's finished college, he's trying to get on his own, but not be in the house and not have to have the full secondary unit.
Well,
not necessarily even as a rental. I mean, because that would prevent, in a sense, a kitchen.
yeah, well, I mean, a kitchen is allowed, it's not required. So you could absolutely have somebody,
On the guest quarters.
the guest quarters. Right.
But if you were to use that as for elderly parents, you can't afford the $5,000 a month to throw them into the old age home. You want them, they still want to cook.
Right.
Do their thing.
Right.
Why should that be an issue for anyone? I'm just curious. I don't see.
It's a good question. It's more so that we kind of understand what's happening and as we go through the use permit.
Is there I think there's probably a good reason to look at relaxing that.
And there may be. We've had some difficulties with some of our code provisions around this and are looking into some of the issues for sure.
Certainly if you're sharing utilities.
Yeah.
It's not like you're renting to a bunch of people that are partying 24 hours a day.
Right. Right.
We're gonna see a gap right now. The average assisted living is 4,400 a month. It's gonna be 6,000 the next 7 years, I believe. You're gonna see a gap of people that can't afford that 6,000, but are gonna want to have that privacy to have the kitchen or have a caregiver make the meals for them in that kitchen.
Right. Yeah. And I think we're set up to allow that just through our processes. And as I mentioned, I think we were one of the first ones that worked through with Lennar some of those next gen homes in order to, because that was during the recession when people, were losing homes and needing to move in with parents, and that became a big thing. So, yeah.
Is there any thought in looking at when someone wants to use a shipping container for this or like a tiny home? How's that been considered in the past?
Typically it's been, typically it's been handled through the building codes side of things. In Gilbert, if you're going to have a structure, it has to be on a foundation. So like a tiny home, a lot of those are not on foundations or on trailers. So that wouldn't be something necessarily that we would support or allow. Shipping containers, I don't know that we've seen anybody wanting to do an accessory structure or living quarters on their home. We have had a couple folks come in where they want to build like apartments out of shipping containers. We haven't seen them come back, but it's something that we can look at and explore, but it hasn't been anything. We haven't seen much of that. And we haven't seen any tiny homes or anything like that come in as just primary dwellings on sites. And I think a lot of that has to do with price of land and what you're going to put on it. So
I've seen the question on social media.
Yeah.
I've seen people ask if anybody knows where they can bring their tiny home to park it, or do you have a large lot and you'd allow me to bring my tiny home and have it on your lot? And people in Gilbert are like, no, can't do it. So
right.
It is talked about.
I know I'm running way over, so I'll try to move through the hardest part quickly. How's that? Our process. So our process is always been, and I think some of you have seen this before, to take something that comes into the town that looks like this, and we want to turn it into something that looks like this without making our proper, or our applicants go through something that looks like this. That has never been our motive. We've never wanted to do that. Ever since I've been here, we've tried to streamline as many things as we possibly can. And that's another reason why we're very upfront with people, because we don't want them going through the process if there's not going to be support for it. This is a very simple kind of overview of the process. This one is, does the land have the appropriate general plan designation and zoning? If your property is zoned and has the general plan for it and you're ready to move forward with your salad and go, okay, you're going to design review. You'll come in to staff, you'll make your formal submittal, you'll do your staff review, you go to planning commission and the planning commission approves it. Doesn't take council action because theoretically council has already seen this through the rezoning and general plan whenever that would have happened. So council would have been aware that it's going to be a commercial development. Okay, it doesn't have the correct zoning or general plan. Okay, we start from the very, very beginning. We ask the applicants to go do a neighborhood meeting. Okay, get your letters out to everybody within the required radius and all of the HOAs within the required radius and hold a neighborhood meeting. We want them to hold a neighborhood meeting and explain to the neighbors what they plan on doing before they even come back to us with a pre-application. A lot of times that takes care of a lot of the red flag issues and everything else. The other side of that is we don't want them to come to us and they'll say, you know, this looks pretty good. Then they go to the neighbors and they have the neighborhood meeting. They say, well, wait a minute, staff has already supported this. This is already okayed by the town. Well, no. So we have the neighborhood meeting first, then it comes in for the pre-application meeting and the formal review. Staff reviews it. We have conversations back and forth with the applicant on any questions or concerns. Then we bring it to the planning commission and the town council for public hearings. Once that part is done, then they basically fall back into that design review where the staff reviews it and then there's the planning commission approval. There are many times where folks will take both of these and run them together. They can run them concurrently. A lot of times in the past, we've seen projects where you have to go through your general plan and your rezoning and then your design review, and then you have to apply for your building permit and get your grading permit, and now you can do this. Well, what we've tried to do is stack those more. So you take that long line of time and compress it so that folks can get through the process much quicker. It's a little bit of a burden to do that on the applicant because they have to expend dollars up front to do those plans because we need pretty detailed plans in order to issue permits. But at least we've given them the option to do that. And as you know, through their building process, we've created a lot of new building permit processes where folks can kind of like a menu, they can choose what they want to do and then approach the town that way. This is a little bit simpler, just to straight down the line. And by the way, these are all in our applications. So when folks go online to our applications, they know the process up front and know exactly where we're going. But then you can also see too where there's a lot of public notification, neighborhood meetings are required, all of that information. So you can see kind of how it moves through that process. Same thing with the design review process. Again, a lot of neighborhood outreach as well. This is very important for us, and we've been pushing this for years and years and years. This is the What's Developing Nearby map that's on our website. We have everything from neighborhood meetings, because even when there's a neighborhood meeting, there's a yellow sign that goes up and the letters go up. You know, what's under review with planning, planning decisions that have been made. And then a lot of times people don't know anything's happening until they see construction. Well, now they can go on and see the building permit review and the construction too. So if you see sticks going up, you can click on that. You can go to that intersection. Oh, this is what it's going to look like. Here's the site plan. Here's the staff report. Here are the building elevations. So anytime we get in front of anybody, we try to push this message out so that, and Dana's team has been fantastic over the years, helping us continue to push this out, and Jen, to get this out to the residents so that everybody knows what's happening. So we try to be as transparent as we possibly can. I know Kathy has even talked about this at the Power Ranch powwows to try to get the information out there. So. Mm-hmm.
Warner. So Piggly Warner in there, and it will pop up. I don't need to know which tab that I need to go to find Piggly Warner.
Okay. Yeah.
You just don't know what you're looking for. You don't know which tab you're supposed to go to. You just know that something's happening on Piggly Warner.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk to our IT team and see what else we can add to that.
Yes, there was a general discussion, council subcommittee meeting about ways we can engage in various forms of it. And one of the things that brought up, and I'm not saying this is the solution, but we also talked about using QR codes on signage. And if we have a QR code on the signs, how we also need to hear. So just take to our website and pull this out. But again, we're going to brainstorm through all these kinds of thoughts and ideas. That's what that's a committee process.
One thing I learned from experience in the past is that to get the homeowners really involved in this process, you have to take them by the hand and lead them into the process and through the process. I tried years ago to get HOAs or neighborhood representatives to come to our pre-app so they'd hear what was discussed at the pre-app and understand that it's, first of all, that the process is open, and secondly, that it's more complicated than they really understand. Hearing your presentation, is there a way, I don't know if it's even possible to mandate that the developer, when they meet with those neighbors in the mandated neighborhood meeting, can we mandate that they have representatives accompany them to pre-app to hear that presentation?
To have
Either from the HOA or from the neighborhood, whatever.
I don't know if we can mandate it because I don't know that I can force somebody to come to a meeting, but I mean, we can encourage it for sure.
Well, we're forcing them to have the neighborhood meeting.
Well, we are because they're entering our process, but now we would be requiring like a neighbor to come to our meeting. I can think that through a little bit. When we do have neighborhood meetings, staff always is there. So we've got staff basically every single night of the week going to neighborhood meetings. So it's a little bit different, but we're there. We see what's going on. We require them to give us minutes and then come to the pre-app. So we're kind of watching it from beginning to end.
We just hear at the public meetings that everything's determined before it gets to us. It's already determined.
Yeah.
The town wants this, and so we're going to approve it. Well, I want them to understand in a pre-app meeting, there's a lot to this process before it even gets to us, and a lot that is discussed, a lot that is required.
Right. Yeah, that's important.
Scott's point, we require a pre-app meeting, much to most developers' chagrin, most zoning attorneys' chagrin.
Yeah.
They don't like the pre-app meeting, but we still have that on as part of our process. A lot of cities and towns don't do that. It's an extra step for them.
Yeah, there's been times too, in our land development code, the planning manager has the authority to require additional neighborhood meetings, and we've done that several times. If somebody's held one in March and they're coming through in October, nope, you please go have another neighborhood meeting. This is too far. So,
Too long.
yeah.
I assume the developer's asking the HOA representative to attend, correct?
They're asking what? I'm sorry.
HOA representative to attend?
We send them letters. What they're a required part of the notification. So we've got a list, and the Maricopa County now want to say the assessor's office has a list too. So if you can go on and create a circle, and whatever comes back, it's got all the lists of all the HOAs, all the property owners. So that's how we get that
I
information.
would say 90% of the time, HOAs don't send any notification out even to their board members that something's going on, and especially their residents. And I don't think I can count on one hand how many times over the years at Planning Commission, I had somebody from an HOA come to a Planning Commission meeting to talk about a project. Very, very seldom do we have HOAs get involved. I think it's more, because the management companies have so many neighborhoods that they're, controlling that they don't necessarily even always pay attention.
And that's one of the areas I think we'll talk about when we get that presentation from our communications subcommittee is how do we reach out to HOAs and get them involved, make sure we have the right information, that type of thing. So hopefully we'll be addressing some of that. And it'll come from them, what they want, when do they want to be involved and all of that. So I think it'll be really good feedback. Kyle, I think it is a Morrison Ranch project, but this time we were able to get a timeline of when the meetings were. And so when there is a lot of neighborhood involvement, for us to have that as council members so that we could respond quickly to those was really helpful.
Good. Great, glad to hear it. Yeah, and for the problems or the things you guys hear, I haven't been notified and I didn't know this was happening. That does occur, but if you look at planning commission agendas, there's 20 to 30 items on there every single time. And if one or two of them gets it every 6 months, I think we're doing a pretty good job. I mean, there's probably still ways to improve and different ways to reach out to people, but I think we're doing a pretty good job of getting them. I'm a half hour over.
You are?
Sorry.
Yeah, but this is.
Everybody else was.
We started.
Don't let him forget
Late. We started about 15
Okay.
minutes late.
All right.
So we didn't start on time, so I'm not holding you for that. But this is a huge.
I know, yeah.